Chapter 32:18. On the eve of the wedding, there was a lot of preparation work. Wuxia started preparing a month in advance to avoid being flustered due to the lack of time. The wedding invitations had been sent out one after another. This time, the invitations were personally designed by Xianxia. After her confinement, she did not make a comeback immediately. When she was at home, she would read some reference books and think about the setting and invitations for the wedding. In order to be able to participate as much as she could, she learned some graphic design. The design of the invitation was very special. With a red background, a gold inlaid border, and a hollowed-out rose, it was a combination of Chinese and Western, adding to the festive atmosphere. After the invitations were sent out, they had to start preparing the details of the wedding. For example, the bridesmaids and groomsmen. Yu suggested forming a group of sisters, but Xianxia did not have many close friends. Those who had been married before could not be the bridesmaids. Hence, the bridesmaids were decided to be Xiao Shui, Mu Shi, and Jun Mo. When Jun Mo heard that Xianxia wanted to invite her to be the bridesmaid of the wedding, she was surprised and happy. She joked that she played the second male lead, Su Qi, in the movie The Green Apple. Now, she was finally going to personally send her lover into the wedding hall. However, she was a little worried that she would not be able to pull off a dress. Jun Mo had always been dressed in a more neutral outfit. In addition, Xianxia's wedding was a Chinese wedding. Hence, she was quite worried. However, the wedding planner said that if short-haired people would look out of place in traditional Chinese clothing, they could provide wigs. When Xianxia heard this, she immediately dragged the 3 bridesmaids to try on the makeup. After trying it on, she realized that Jun Mo looked very good in women's clothes. After all, her facial features were there. A good-looking person would look good in anything. Jun Mo felt a little awkward at first, but Xianxia repeatedly emphasized that this was the only wedding and they had to give face. Jun Mo could only bite the bullet and agree. There was no need to worry about the groomsmen. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen were the best candidates. Wuxia also invited Qin Zhou to be the groomsman. Such a joyous occasion, Qin Zhou was naturally happy. The bridesmaids and groomsmen were finally decided. When they came back in the evening, Xianxia showed Wuxia the photos of the bridesmaids trying on their makeup. Wuxia especially noticed Jun Mo's appearance. He recognized Jun Mo as the second male lead in the movie at a glance and felt that it was a little unbelievable. Who is she? Wasn't he playing the second male lead? Xianxia said reproachfully, have you forgotten? I've introduced her to you before. Her name is Jun Mo. She's a real girl. She was a musician and liked to dress in a neutral manner. Her fans had always called her Adonis or Adonis. She had suffered a little because of my wedding. It was said that this was the first time she had worn a dress since she was young. You've made me feel flattered. Wuxia held back his laughter and nodded. It's very beautiful. He asked again, have the invitations been sent out? Actually, the VIP list for the wedding had been prepared long ago. Many of the invitations had been written long ago. However, there was an invitation that would never reach that person's hands. Chapter 32:19. This invitation card probably wouldn't be sent to him. However, she did not know why she had written his name on the invitation. When she came back to her senses, she realized that this invitation would not be sent to the other side of the world. She did not know if there would really be a heaven in this world like the legend said. She had seen a movie called The Postman of Heaven. The plot was about the male lead who was once an elite in the IT industry. He had a successful career and a flamboyant personality. However, due to an accident, he became a vegetable. God gave him 2 more weeks of life as a condition for him to be the postman of heaven. He would deliver letters between heaven and the human world, bringing hope to those who had lost their loved ones. She did not know if this invitation could be sent to heaven. If Gu Xingzi was really in heaven, would he wish her happiness too? Thinking of this name, the rims of her eyes turned slightly sour again. In the past, she did not dare to hope too much for happiness, because once she became happy, she felt uneasy at the thought that this happiness was built on Gu Xing's sacrificing his life to protect her. It was too selfish of her. However, Qin Zhou said that Gu Xing's risked his life to protect her only because he hoped that she could be the continuation of his life. She could replace him and enjoy the joys and sorrows of life. She gradually got rid of the trauma. Xingzi, are you okay? Yun Shishir smiled and mumbled as she slowly closed the invitation. Wuxia pushed open the door of the study and walked in. He saw her sitting alone at the table, pressing an invitation to her chest. She looked a little lonely. He walked over and gently put his arm around her shoulders. Looking at the invitation in her hand, he knew whose name was written on this invitation. He asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking if this invitation can be sent to him." Wuxia could not help but laugh and burst her fantasy. Heaven does not exist in this world. When people die, they will not come back to life, and they will not become angels. The disappointment on Yun Shishir's face became more obvious. She also knew that her extravagant hope did not exist. It was just her wishful thinking. He slowly squatted down in front of her, held her hand, and said solemnly, "That's why, in my limited life, I'll cherish you." He reached out his hand and pinched her cheek gently. "My dear wife, you're about to get married. Don't think about those unpleasant memories anymore. People will inevitably have regrets in their lives, but these regrets cannot be brushed aside for the rest of their lives." "Yes." Yun Shishir put the invitation card back into the drawer and hugged him gently. The preparations for the wedding proceeded in an orderly manner. There was still a week before the wedding, so Gong Jia brought Yun Yeqing back to the country in advance. When Yun Yeqing got off the plane, he saw Yun Shishir carrying the pink Yueyao at the arrival gate. Wuxia, Yu, and Xiao Yichen were all there. The corners of Yun Yeqing's lips twitched. He could not hold back his tears and they welled up. The father and daughter reunited again and were filled with emotions. Yun Yeqing felt extremely guilty and regretful toward her. During the darkest period of her life, he was not by her side to protect her. She was pregnant for 10 months, gave birth, and went through her confinement period after giving birth. He regretted that he was not by her side. Chapter 32:20. There was an indescribable sense of guilt in his heart. Yun Shishir, on the other hand, was very surprised by Yun Yeqing's recovery. Ever since he was sent to the Gong family, they had been in contact through video calls. From the video, she could tell that Yun Yeqing was recovering very quickly, but she did not expect him to recover 50% of his looks. At least, after skin grafting, some of his functional organs were no longer a problem. Although his looks could not be said to have recovered completely, after some adjustments, it had already exceeded her expectations. What was even more surprising was that he could already speak fluently. After a few vocal cord surgeries, he could already express himself clearly in words. Yun Shishir was pleasantly surprised. She hugged Gong Jia and was so excited that she could not speak. Gong Jia smiled. "Sister, I promised you that I'll do my best. Since I've said that, I naturally have to fulfill my promise." Yun Shishir said sincerely to him, "Thank you." Xiao Jia. Don't you think it's too polite to say thank you? Gong Jia had returned to the country to prepare for her wedding. Originally, Wuxia had invited the media to cover the entire wedding, but Yun Shishir requested not to be too ostentatious. However, because it involved the guests attending the wedding, most of them were of noble status, especially someone like Xiao Jia, who could not be exposed in front of the cameras. Furthermore, there were many national politicians and leaders, as well as nobles from various countries. If the media were to expose it, it would be too much of a fuss. She wanted to keep a low profile. Yu said from the side, "You're already destined to not be able to keep a low profile after marrying a perfect man like Daddy." At the side, Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen were amused. Yu's words are amazing. Wuxia was elated when he heard that. As a father, he could not help but feel smug when his son praised him so much. Yun Shishir said in annoyance, Yu, Mommy is being serious. Mommy will be nervous if there are more than 10 media outlets following this wedding. Mommy, you've seen a lot of the world, after all. You've also been to Fashion Week. When you were filming, there were so many cameras pointed at you, but you didn't seem nervous at all. This is different. How is it different? Xianxia reiterated again, marriage and acting are different. If there were any mistakes during filming, they could still redo it. But when it came to marriage, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to redo it. I only have one chance in my life, so I'm very nervous. Gong Jie said, speaking of which, I'm curious why I'm not the best man. Yu said, because Daddy is afraid that Uncle will cause trouble if he doesn't like it. Yu added, the best man's job is the most difficult. Uncle, I'm sure you won't be able to take it. Xiao Yichen chimed in, that's right. The best man is the groom's slave. Uncle, are you willing to do that? Little Yichen replied, it's a small matter to ruin the wedding. What if Uncle regrets it halfway and can't bear to let Mommy marry Daddy? If that happens, Daddy won't be able to chase after them. The two little fellows echoed each other. Xianxia snorted and snickered. Gong Jie's face turned pale. If I couldn't bear to part with him, would I have specially rushed back to the country? For Yueao's sake, I wouldn't ruin the wedding. He was not that pretentious. He had already silently accepted the fact that Wuxia was his brother-in-law. Chapter 32:21. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen, who were sitting at the side, felt that they had been implicated. They jumped up and protested, what do you mean by the best man can't be too handsome? Exactly. Then what are we? Sister-in-law, we don't like what you're saying. Aren't we handsome? Gong Jia was satisfied. However, Wuxia was displeased. Madam, are you saying that I'm not as handsome as brother-in-law? Gong Jia chimed in, is there a need to ask? Sister is just worried that I'll steal your limelight if I'm the best man. Shut up. The truth is hurtful. Brother-in-law, this means that in sister's eyes, I'm more handsome than you. Shut up. Huh, I won't. Wuxia glared at him. Gong Jia glared back at him. Their eyes met, and there was a burst of electromagnetic sparks. Xianxia said, she seemed to have unintentionally started a war. Yu saw that her father and uncle were at loggerheads. She quickly tried to smooth things over and change the topic. Uncle, how much have you prepared for Mommy's wedding? Gong Jia said, 50 million. Xianxia widened her eyes in shock. 50 million? Yeah. Gong Jia wrapped his arm around her arm and rested his chin on her shoulder. He smiled and said, Sister, are you touched? Wuxia reached out and pushed his face away. He sneered, 50 million? How petty. Petty? Gong Jia was furious. 50 million US dollars is petty? Do you want me to give you all my assets? Wuxia reached out shamelessly. Give it to me. Gong Jia sneered, brother-in-law, you're so shameless. Wuxia returned an elegant smile. No matter how shameless I am, I'm not as shameless as you. You keep saying that sister is the most important, but you only prepared a dowry of 50 million. How petty. Gong Jia gritted his teeth and said, fine, I'll give you 100 million then. 100 million? Xianxia sucked in another breath of cold air. She hurriedly used her fingers to calculate how much 100 million US dollars was worth. Yu watched from the side. She finally knew who Xiao Yichen had inherited his poor arithmetic skills from. 100 million US dollars is equivalent to about 700 million yuan. 100 million US dollars is equivalent to 700 million yuan. It was the sound of a golden abacus. Xianxia felt a headache coming on as she was being hit by the money. That much? How much was little Jie's net worth? How could he casually fork out 100 million? Xianxia doubted the credibility of this statement. Wuxia's lips curled into a triumphant smile. That's more like it. Keep your word, I'll be waiting for your check. Gong Jia felt that he had been tricked. His face was ashen, but he couldn't say anything to refute. Xianxia comforted him, it's okay, Xiao Jia. When you get married, get your brother-in-law to give you 200 million. Gong Jie's eyes lit up. Really? Yun Shishir nodded solemnly. Yu Yu held her face and screamed, Daddy, the backyard is on fire. Mommy is going to sell you. Xiao Yichen collapsed on the sofa laughing. He hugged Muyaja's stiff back and laughed until he couldn't catch his breath. Daddy, hurry up and earn money. Otherwise, when Uncle gets married, you won't be able to give him anything. Muyaja said, I refuse. 200 million? No. Yu Yu also collapsed from laughing. Although Daddy could afford 200 million, if he took out 200 million at once, his little treasury would be empty. Among everyone present, Gong Jie had the highest net worth. Chapter 32-22. Yu Yu was well aware of Gong Jie's wealth. His wealth was comparable to that of a country's. The annual revenue from orders in North America alone was more than a few billion US. After deducting the costs, the net profit was more than $3 billion US. This was only the revenue from orders in North America. Apart from that, the total volume of arms sales in Africa was even more impressive. Most importantly, Gong Jie owned 2 military factories. The arms produced by these factories were sold to various countries and were very profitable. Yu Yu had once described Gong Jie as his uncle. He was so rich that his hand would be greasy when he touched it. Hence, 100 million US was nothing to him. However, this amount was still relatively objective for his daddy. Yu Yu's heart ached for his daddy for a few seconds. Hua Jin had rushed over from the filming set. When he opened the door and saw Gong Jie, his back stiffened instantly. Oh my God, the crown prince was here again. It was the Devil King. Hua Jin deliberately walked around Gong Jie and sat next to Xiao Yichen. Gong Jie noticed that Hua Jin seemed to be avoiding him and frowned slightly. Why are you avoiding me? Do you think I will eat you? You will, however. Hua Jin only dared to keep these words to himself. He did not dare to say it out loud. Gong Jie was his nemesis. In his heart, Gong Jie had always been on the level of a demon king. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going to hug my little niece. As he said this, Gong Jie stood up and walked towards the baby's room. He had been so focused on discussing the wedding that he had not seen the little Yueyao that he had been thinking about day and night. When he walked into the baby's room, little Yueyao was sleeping soundly in the cradle. Gong Jie did not want to disturb her, so he sat quietly by the side and rested his chin on one hand. He leaned against the side of the bed and looked at her quietly. After watching for a long time, the little Yueyao yawned and woke up in a daze. Interestingly enough, when he saw her yawn, he unconsciously followed suit and yawned as well. It was said that if one party yawned, the other party would also be affected. Little Yueyao opened his eyes and looked around. When he saw Gong Jie, he raised his eyebrows slightly and raised his little hand to point at him. In Gong Jie's eyes, it looked like he was greeting him. This squishy little ball obviously recognized Gong Jie. She kicked her little legs excitedly, opened her little hands, and scratched at him. He was obviously asking for a hug. His niece was asking for a hug. As her uncle, he was naturally happy to oblige. Gong Jie reached out and held little Yueyao in his arms under the little girl's armpit. But the next scene made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps it was because she had slept for too long, but the little girl was a little hungry. She pulled Gong Jie's clothes with familiarity, opened her little mouth, and accurately sucked on Gong Jie's chest through his clothes. Gong Jie's back stiffened. He lowered his head and looked at the little Yueyao's greedy face. Her little mouth left a circle of water on his clothes. He was speechless. Where did he get the milk from? This scene was coincidentally seen by Yu Yu, who pushed the door open and walked in. At first, she was stunned for a moment, then she laughed until she was convulsing with laughter. Ha 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 ha. Yu Yu's laughter attracted a group of people over. Chapter 32-23. Gong Jie's face was gloomy. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry and looked helpless. When he saw Muyaja enter, he became even more embarrassed and asked Yun Shishir for help. Sister, ha ha ha. Yun Shishir was also laughing so hard that she doubled over. Gong Jia said angrily, Sister, you're still laughing at me. Hurry up and feed her. Yun Shishir laughed and said, Just you wait. She turned around to get the milk bottle. Then she walked over and handed it to Gong Jia. Gong Jia looked at the milk bottle and was stunned for a moment. After Yun Shishir explained, he realized that Yue Yao had used too much force when she was drinking milk and it always hurt her. Hence, she used a breast pump to suck all the milk into the milk bottle and then used the milk bottle to feed Yue Yao. She must have been drinking the milk bottle for a long time. Gong Jia shook the milk bottle gently and then brought the pacifier to Yue Yao's mouth. The little girl opened her small pink mouth and sucked on the pacifier. Then she drank the milk with relish. Yun Shishir couldn't help sneaking glances at the water stains on his chest from the corner of her eye. She couldn't help but laugh secretly from time to time. After Yue Yao's 100th day celebration, Gong Jia went abroad. Even though he hadn't held Yue Yao for a long time, he was still very familiar with the way he held her. When Yu saw this, he secretly whispered in Xiao Yichen's ear, Uncle's way of holding Yue Yao is so professional. He's much more qualified than Daddy. Mu Yaja heard him. He grabbed him by the ear and said darkly, What are you saying about me again? I'm just saying that Uncle's way of holding Yue Yao is so professional. He'll definitely be a qualified stay-at-home dad in the future. Am I not? Of course Daddy is. Otherwise, how could he have raised Yue Yao so well? Mu Yaja was finally satisfied. Gong Jia watched Yue Yao suckle and asked, Can she talk now? Not yet. Little sister has just learned how to sit. That day, when they went out to play, little Yue Yao suddenly sat up in order to snatch the toy from Yu Yu's hands. This gave Yu Yu a fright. After returning home, Yu Yu told Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir that his little sister could sit up on her own. However, no matter how hard Yun Shishir tried to teach little Yue Yao to sit up, the little girl remained indifferent. Until one day, she accidentally walked into the room and saw little Yue Yao sitting up alone, playing with a toy. She got a shock. That was when she realized that perhaps little Yue Yao had already learned how to sit up. However, this little girl was very lazy. Unless she was attracted by something, she would rather lie down than sit up. Gong Jia did not believe her. He moved the milk bottle away and looked at Yue Yao patiently. Yue Yao, call me uncle. Yia, uncle. Uncle. Yia, Gong Jia had an I've lost to you expression on his face. Yun Shishir said, She can't talk yet. If you teach her like this, she'll only think that you're playing with her. When she can talk, I'll definitely make her call me uncle first. No way. Mu Yaja disagreed. Give up. The first person she would call would definitely be Daddy or Mommy. Uncle? Dream on. Gong Jia sneered. How easy is it to pronounce uncle? Daddy is so difficult. Little Yue Yao will definitely not be able to learn it. However, a certain man was very confident. My daughter is so smart. No matter how difficult it is, she'll be able to learn it. Chapter 32-24. Brother-in-law, let's bet that the first person Yue Yao calls is uncle. When Yu heard this, he protested unhappily. Why can't she call me brother? Gong Jia smacked the back of his head and said in disdain, Go away. This is none of your business. Yu held the back of his head and glared at him fiercely. Suddenly, he thought of something and smiled slyly. He turned around and whispered something in Xiao Yichen's ear. The latter gave Yu a knowing look and smiled mysteriously at him. The two little lads smiled slyly. At night, Yu and Xiao Yichen tiptoed through the bedroom door and slipped into the master bedroom. The door to the master bedroom was ajar. Little Yichen tiptoed into the nursery in the master bedroom and walked to the side of the cradle. He poked his head over and saw that little Yue Yao was awake. Her big eyes were wide open, and when she saw him, she was so excited that her eyes squinted and she smiled. Her little legs kicked in excitement. Xiao Yichen immediately put his finger up and gestured for her to keep quiet. However, little Yueyao did not understand what he was gesturing at. Instead, she was curious. She widened her eyes and tilted her head in confusion. He bent down and carefully picked up little Yueyao. Then he carried his little sister and slipped out of the room and into his own bedroom. Yu took out the milk bottle and let Xiao Yichen carry little Yueyao. He first fed his beloved little sister milk. When the little girl was full, Xiao Yichen carried little Yueyao in his arms. Yu looked at her and smiled gently. Yueyao, brother will teach you how to speak, okay? Little Yueyao smacked her lips. Her bright eyes sparkled under the moonlight. Yu grabbed her little hand and said word by word, brother. Brother, he deliberately spoke slowly and enunciated each word clearly. He was teaching her seriously. When Yueyao heard this, she was tickled by his slow speech and especially amused expression. She kicked her little legs excitedly and giggled. Ha ha ha, Yu was confused and repeated, Yueyao, call brother. Brother, ha ha ha, little Yueyao kicked her little legs excitedly again. Yu held his forehead. He felt inexplicably helpless. Xiao Yichen quickly comforted him and said, Yu, don't be anxious. My sister is only 6 months old. Teaching her to speak at this time is already ahead of schedule. Moreover, she doesn't know anything and needs to be taught patiently. Hearing this, he innocently replied, Sis doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying. You're so big, but you can't understand what others are saying. Take it slow. Xiao Yichen grinned and said, You have to teach her how to call you brother first. Uncle and Daddy will be furious. Humph. That's right. When Yu thought of how Gong Jia would look when he heard Yueyao calling him brother, he perked up again. Brother, ha ha ha, brother. Brother, ha ha ha. In the end, Yu's throat was almost smoking from teaching. He didn't know how this little one could laugh so easily. She couldn't stop laughing. Yu loved to laugh. Chapter 32-25. Yu pinched her tender cheeks, only to see Yueyao yawn. He hurriedly said, Hurry up and send her back to sleep. Xiao Yichen nodded and secretly carried Yueyao back to her room. The next day, at night, Yu calculated the time. He already knew his little sister's schedule like the back of his hand. He knew what time she would wake up in the middle of the night and when she would want to drink milk. Hence, he secretly carried Yueyao back to his room and patiently taught her how to speak over and over again. When Yueyao was sleepy, Xiao Yichen would carry her back to the nursery. However, after 4 to 5 days, little Yueyao did not seem to have made any progress. When he taught her to call him big brother, she would sometimes get impatient and kick him with her little feet. Yu could not help but feel aggrieved. After all, his mommy said that he could already say mommy when he was 5 months old. The pronunciation of mommy and mommy were several times more difficult than gij. In the end, after so many days of teaching, there was still no progress. Yu could not help but feel a little disappointed. Even so, he did not give up. On the eve of the wedding, Wuxia withdrew a stack of brand new banknotes from the bank. These banknotes were to be used to prepare red packets for the children. Each red packet contained $888, 800 bills, 8 $10 bills, and 8 $1 bills. The amount was not large and was purely for luck. However, these red packets had to be packed by hand. Yu and Xiao Yichen volunteered to pack the red packets. When Yun Shishir saw that they had volunteered to share the burden, she went to the garden with peace of mind and cut some Chinese roses to be used as the bride's bouquet. On the day of the wedding, they would have an outdoor wedding and an indoor one. The outdoor wedding would be a Western-style lawn wedding, while the indoor wedding would be a traditional Chinese wedding. A Western-style wedding would have a relaxed and romantic atmosphere, while a Chinese wedding would be grand and solemn. This was also the final result of the discussion between Yun Shishir and Wuxia. There were both Western and Chinese elements, and they did not conflict with each other. A lawn wedding was for the young guests. It was relaxing and romantic, but as the main venue, the wedding was more solemn. After Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen sealed the red packets, another red packet appeared. Yu Yu said that he wanted to give the red packet to his little sister. As soon as they reached the baby's room, Yu Yu leaned over the crib and stuffed the red packet into little Yuyao's hand. "Here, little sister. This is a red packet for you. Call me Big Brother." He was merely joking and teasing her. After all, he didn't really expect his sister to be able to call out his name. However, what happened next gave Yu Yu a big surprise. Little Yueyao reached out her little hand and pinched the corner of the red packet tightly. Her other hand fiddled with the red packet curiously, not knowing what was inside. She held the red packet with one hand, opened and closed her little mouth, and said two words, "Ge, Ge." Yu Yu was really shocked. He nervously held his breath and listened carefully. Little Yueyao gave him face. She waved the red packet in her hand and said with saliva bubbling from her pink little mouth, "Big Brother, wow." Yu Yu was so excited that he almost jumped 3 feet high. Chapter 32-26. Yu Yu hurriedly picked up little Yueyao and ran into the living room. Yun Shishir was meticulously arranging the bouquet. Yu Yu carried little Yueyao to Yun Shishir. She was so excited that she didn't know what to do. "Mommy. Mommy. Little sister can speak. And the first person she can call is Big Brother." When Xiao Yichen heard this, she leaned over in surprise. "Really? Really?" When Yun Shishir heard this, she didn't think much of it. She asked curiously, "Yueyao can't speak yet. Yu Yu, did you hear wrongly?" How could she not know that this little guy wanted to hear Yueyao call him Big Brother even in his dreams? Yu Yu hurriedly explained, "Mommy, little sister really said Big Brother. I really heard it loud and clear. How could I have heard wrongly? No one taught her to call him Big Brother. Why would she call him Big Brother for no reason?" Yun Shishir only knew that Gong Jia and Mu Yaja had been secretly teaching little Yueyao to call him Uncle and Daddy. These two clowns seemed to be racing against time, fighting to be the first person Yueyao would call out Uncle or Daddy. Especially Mu Yaja. In order to make Yueyao open her mouth, he had used all sorts of methods. He had even used Yueyao's favorite toy to seduce her, but he still couldn't get her to open her mouth. There was nothing he could do about it. How old was Yueyao? She was more than 5 months old and still couldn't speak coherently. She could only vaguely use a few syllables to indicate her emotions. She would have to wait for 6 or 7 months before she could speak. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility of her speaking earlier. Yu Yu said, "Mommy, it's true. I've been teaching little sister to call him Big Brother for the past few days. Didn't Mommy say that I also learned to speak earlier? Maybe little sister is smarter than me?" As he spoke, as if afraid that Yun Shishir wouldn't believe him, he gently squeezed Yueyao's little hand and said patiently, "Little sister, Mommy doesn't believe you. Hurry up and tell Mommy, what did you say just now?" Little Yueyao acted as if he did not hear what Yu Yu said. He was still focused on the red packet in his hand. Her little hand was holding the red packet, almost tearing it apart, but she was playing with it enthusiastically. Yu Yu tried her best to attract her attention. She shook her little hand and said gently, "Little sister, didn't you call me very clearly just now? Why aren't you barking now? Come on, let Mommy hear it." "She doesn't believe me." "Big Brother, little sister, quickly call him Big Brother." When little Yueyao heard this, she thought that he wanted to play with the red packet in her hand, so she immediately raised the red packet in her hand and generously handed it to him. Yu Yu was instantly amused and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he still emphasized, "Mommy, Yueyao really did call me Big Brother." "Really?" Yun Shishir's eyes turned into crescents. She smiled and said, "Okay, Mommy got it. Maybe it's just a coincidence that little sister called him that once. There's still plenty of time in the future, so there will be more opportunities." Xiao Yichen couldn't help but feel a little regretful that he didn't hear Yueyao call him Big Brother. However, according to what Mommy said, there was still plenty of time in the future. Moreover, he was very open-minded. Even if he wasn't the first to learn to call him Big Brother, it didn't affect his love for his little sister. Little Yueyao yawned lightly, as if she was a little sleepy. Chapter 32-27. Okay. Yu obediently carried Yueyao into the room. When she came out, she sat next to Yun Shishir and asked curiously, Mommy, the wedding is the day after tomorrow. Are you nervous? Yun Shishir was stunned when she heard this. She nodded slightly and said with a red face, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Of course I'm nervous. Even though she had already rehearsed the wedding ceremony, she felt increasingly nervous as the wedding date approached. She didn't know why she was nervous, but she just felt nervous. Yu covered her mouth and giggled. Is Daddy nervous too? Daddy seems to be busy with the wedding recently, Xiao Yichen mumbled. Sometimes, he can't even make it back for dinner. He's busy decorating the venue. I told him that there would be someone to decorate the venue, but he wouldn't listen. He said that it's his own wedding, so he has to do everything himself. I even went to the bridal chamber with Daddy yesterday. It's so beautifully decorated. The bridal chamber was at Yun Shanshi. Therefore, when the bride was picked up, they had to bring her to Yun Shanshi before going to Yun Shanshi Resort for the wedding. The night before the wedding, Wuxia went to the bridal chamber according to wedding tradition. At night, Yun Shishir was so nervous that she couldn't sleep. She had to get up early the next morning to wash up and dress up, but she still couldn't sleep until midnight. She was worried that something would go wrong at the wedding the next day. She didn't know if Wuxia was asleep, so she sent a text message. Would be, are you asleep? Within a few seconds, Wuxia replied, not yet. You're still awake? Yun Shishir pursed her lips and dialed his number. Wuxia picked up the phone and asked her why she wasn't asleep. Yun Shishir said coquettishly, I'm so nervous that I can't sleep. Why would I be nervous? Aren't you nervous? Close your eyes and don't let your imagination run wild. You'll fall asleep soon. But, Yun Shishir said hesitantly, I'm nervous about whether the wedding will go smoothly tomorrow. On the other end, the man laughed when he heard that. If I can't even handle a wedding, how can I be worthy of being your man? These words were very pleasing to her ears. Her man was so reliable and gave her a great sense of security. Her heart was filled with sweetness. Yun Shishir then said, then I'll go to bed early. You should rest early too. Yes. After hanging up the phone, Yun Shishir turned off the wall lamp and fell asleep peacefully. The next day, the alarm clock went off at 5:00. Yun Shishir woke up with a start. She was still a little groggy at first, but Yu knocked on the door and said, Mommy, the makeup artist is here. She immediately woke up, and her sleepiness disappeared. She immediately went to the bathroom to wash up, and then opened the door. Outside the door, two makeup artists in well-ironed uniforms were dragging suitcases in their hands. This suitcase was filled with the equipment needed for the makeup. When they saw Yun Shishir, the two makeup artists were surprised. Oh. The bride's skin is so good. I put on a facial mask last night. The makeup artists looked at each other and smiled. Then they said to Yun Shishir, shall we start the makeup? Yun Shishir sat at the dressing table. Starting from her face, the two makeup artists started working separately. One put on her makeup, the other arranged her jewelry and ironed her clothes. Chapter 32-28. One was a shioha dress for the wedding, the other was a wedding dress for an outdoor wedding, and the other was a traditional Chinese wedding dress for an indoor Chinese wedding. Wuxia had specially hired a top stylist and makeup team. Hence, even if it was a mixed Chinese and Western wedding, there was no need to worry about the makeup clashing. It was already 6:00 when the makeup was done. Yun Shishir had just changed into the shioha dress when Gong Jia arrived. He walked into the room and saw that Yun Shishir had already changed. She stood in front of the full-length mirror and let the makeup artist put on the forehead ornament for her. When she turned around, Gong Jia was really stunned. He muttered sourly as he walked toward her. I don't know where brother-in-law got his luck from to be able to marry my sister. He stood in front of her and looked at her gently. Suddenly, his lips curled into a smile as he gently held Xianxia's hand. "Sis, you're so beautiful." Xianxia looked at him and asked tentatively, "How beautiful?" "The world's most beautiful." "Humph. You only know how to make me happy." "How am I making you happy?" "You're so beautiful that I can't bear to marry you off." Gong Jie's words were sincere, especially when he saw Xianxia's beautiful side. He cursed fiercely in his heart. He did not know what methods Wuxia had used to kidnap his sister. "He won't be able to welcome you easily today." Gong Jie laughed sinisterly. "I learned about the process of a Chinese wedding last night. It said that the groom's family has to guard the door when he welcomes the bride. He won't be able to enter the door so easily." Xianxia asked nervously, "What are you going to do?" "Humph." Gong Jie only sneered and did not say anything. At 7:00, Xiao Shui, Mu Shi, and Jun Mo arrived. They had changed into their bridesmaid outfits and had their makeup done in advance. Hua Jin also hurried over. As a member of the bride's family, he was in charge of guarding the door. At that time, they would just have to wait for the groom to come and fetch the bride. At 8:00 in the morning, Wuxia arrived with his motorcade. All of them were Bentleys, and the first one was his limited edition Rolls-Royce. When he reached the door, Gong Jie closed the door and gave him the cold shoulder. According to tradition, when the groom fetched the bride's family would definitely guard the door. However, if it were an ordinary family, it would be much easier for Wuxia to deal with. All he had to do was to stuff red packets under the door. Wuxia had specially given out a few hundred red packets last night. But the problem was, would these red packets be enough for Gong Jie? A certain man had already stuffed dozens of red packets through the crack of the door. Hua Jin had already filled a bag with red packets, but the Gong Jie guarding the door still had no intention of letting him go. "Brother-in-law, this red packet is not enough to open the door." The groomsmen behind Wuxia immediately became restless. Lu Jinyu went to Wuxia's door and whispered, "Brother-in-law, this brother-in-law guarding the door doesn't seem easy to deal with." Jiang Shen was also anxious. "How many red packets have we stuffed? Shouldn't he let us go now?" Wuxia had already expected the Gong Jie to block the door, but today was a special day and he could not afford to be careless. Hence, he asked calmly, "Shao Jie, what do I have to do for you to let me in?" "Do 100 push-ups first." 100 push-ups? Gong Jie said again, "Do it in one go. You're not allowed to stop." Chapter 32:29. "Oh my God!" Lu Jinyu exclaimed. "His arms are going to be crippled if he does 100 push-ups in a row. How can he carry the bride?" Hua Jin's voice came from inside. "Not only the groom, but the groomsman has to do it too." Jiang Shen was flustered when he heard that. He lowered his voice and said, "Boss, you told me that being the groomsman isn't a good job. I really believed you." "Cut the crap." Wuxia handed him the bouquet. "Hold it for me first." Jiang Shen took the bouquet from him, only to see Wuxia lying on the floor and doing push-ups one after another without a word. Lu Jinyu broke out in a cold sweat as he watched from the side. His legs turned to jelly at the thought of having to do 100 push-ups later. Doing 100 push-ups was definitely not an easy task. Even though Wuxia had amazing stamina, his handsome face was flushed red and beads of perspiration were dripping down his face when he did the 80th push-up. Gong Jie counted carefully through the peephole. When Wuxia finished 100 push-ups, he said, "The groomsmen can start too." Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu had the urge to run away when they heard that. Wuxia glanced at them and said, "What are you waiting for?" Since boss had given the order, they had to pull up their pants and do as he said. Lu Jinyu even loosened his belt and looked like he wanted to say something. He shot a resentful look at Wuxia before lying on the ground with Jiang Shen and starting to do push-ups. Qin Zhou felt miserable and said indignantly, "Chairman Mu, why didn't you say so earlier? Why are you torturing your groomsmen? Cut the crap. Do 100 push-ups quickly." Qin Zhou was so angry that his stomach hurt. He patted his stomach and secretly encouraged himself before lying on the ground with a long face. The 3 pitiful groomsmen were doing push-ups one after another on the ground. At first, they looked decent and could be considered standard. However, they gradually lost their stamina, especially Jianghu, who had been neglecting his exercise for the past few days. When he reached the 80th push-up, he felt that it was no longer a push-up. It was a salted fish. Lu Jinyu was the first to finish. After he got up, he slumped onto the ground and began to doubt his life. Wuxia thoughtfully handed him a handkerchief. Lu Jinyu took it weakly and leaned against the wall, no longer caring about his poise. Jianghu and Qin Zhou finished at the same time. Both of them looked like they wanted to cry. Qin Zhou said, "I've never done so many push-ups in my life." Wuxia faced the door and asked, "Can we go in now?" Gong Jie's voice drifted out. "How can it be so simple?" Huh? Jianghu felt a lingering fear. "Don't tell me you're up to something again?" Gong Jie said, "Do another 100 sit-ups." Lu Jinyu almost fell to the ground. Qin Zhou finally understood what was going on. He moved closer to Wuxia and said in a low voice, "Chairman Mu, I can see what he's trying to do to you." "Oh? This brother-in-law of yours wants you to bow down and beg for mercy. Perhaps he'll let you in then." Beg for mercy? When Wuxia heard this, he realized that Qin Zhou had the same idea as him. Indeed, he and Gong Jie had always been at loggerheads. Now that he had such an opportunity, it was obvious that he wouldn't let him in so easily. But asking him to beg for mercy? He would never do as he wished. Chapter 32:30. Under Lu Jinyu and Jiangxun's dumbfounded gazes, Wuxia sat on the floor and ordered, "Someone come and hold me down." Qin Zhou immediately walked over and held him down. Wuxia held the back of his head with both hands and started to sit up. Lu Jinyu broke out in a cold sweat as he watched. Inside the door, Gong Jie urged, "You have to be the best man too." Jiangxun cried and begged, "Brother-in-law, spare me." Gong Jie said coldly, "Who's your brother-in-law?" Jiangxun smacked his forehead. I can't call him that." He threw himself against the door and cried, "No matter who you are, you're the gatekeeper. You can't play like this. After 100 push-ups, my legs are weak. If I have to do another 100 sit-ups, I'd better jump down from upstairs." "Just jump. It's only the 2nd floor anyway." Lu Jinyu leaned against the door in disgust. "Brother, think about it from another perspective. On the day you get married, if your wife's biological brother stands at the door and asks you to do 100 push-ups, you won't be able to take it." Gong Jie said disdainfully, "To me, 100 push-ups is nothing. You guys are too weak." Weak? Lu Jinyu and Jiangxun were not convinced when they heard this. How dare he call us weak? No. Prove it to them. 100 sit-ups is a piece of cake. With that, Lu Jinyu sat on the floor and let Jiangxun hold his legs down as he sat up. After everyone was done, Wuxia stood at the door, but Gong Jie still had no intention of letting him in. Xiao Shui ran out of the boudoir and walked to Gong Jie's side. Seeing that the poor groom had not been let in, she did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Xiao Jie, are you still not letting him in? Don't let the bride wait too long." Gong Jie said, "Help me tell sister that the bride should be more reserved." Xiao Shui, in the end, it was Mu Shi who ran out to plead for mercy. Only then did the Gong Jie reluctantly open the door and let Wuxia in. As soon as Wuxia walked in, his aura surged. Hua Jin was frightened by his aura and immediately raised his hands in surrender. "Brother-in-law, this is definitely not my idea." Gong Jie held his head high and puffed out his chest. He even said in disdain, "I'll let you off today." Wuxia, when Lu Jinyu saw that Wuxia's face was covered in sweat, he hurriedly went forward to wipe it off for him. "You must be tired, brother-in-law." Gong Jie also smiled, but the way he looked at him was very evil. Wuxia stared at him for a long time, his face tense for a while, then suddenly revealed a peerless smile. "Just you wait, you will also have this day. Gong Jia also smiled provocatively. We'll wait and see. Mu Yaja walked to the door and knocked. His voice suddenly became gentle. Honey, I'm here. In the room, Mushi heard the approaching footsteps and was even more nervous than Yunshishir. It was only when Mu Yaja's gentle voice suddenly sounded close to the door that she subconsciously reached out to open the door. Xiao Shui quickly stopped her. What are you doing? Mushi reacted and immediately retracted her hand. Xiao Shui glared at her and said, You can't open the door now. How can it be so easy to see the bride? Shui. Outside the door, Mu Yaja gently called her name. Be good and open the door. For a moment, Xiao Shui was mesmerized by his magnetic voice and subconsciously reached out to open the door. Chapter 32-31. Mu Yaja reached out and gently touched the bridge of his nose. He seemed to find the situation a little tricky. Qin Zhou, who was beside him, pushed him away. Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu immediately pounced on the door and slammed it hard. Open the door, open the door. Bride, open the door. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen had just hidden their red high heels and walked to the door. When they heard Mu Yaja's voice, they snickered. Red packets. Red packets. Mu Yaja heard them and scolded inwardly, these two little rascals. What happened to the cooperation between the inside and the outside? He turned around and ordered Qin Zhou, stuff them with red packets. Qin Zhou quickly squatted down and stuffed the red packets through the crack of the door. Xiao Yichen said greedily, Not enough, not enough. You want to send us away with these few red packets? Qin Zhou continued to stuff the red packets in his hand into the door, but he still could not pass. Jiang Shen shouted pitifully from outside, Sister-in-law. Take pity on boss, please. Boss was tortured badly by his brother-in-law. He did more than 100 push-ups and sit-ups. He's so tired that he's about to collapse. Yunshishir, who was sitting on the bed, covered her mouth and snickered when she heard the commotion. She had long expected that Shao Jia would not let him in so easily. How could she not know? That was why she asked Xiao Shui and Mu Shi to plead for mercy. Shao Jia listened to her and let Mu Yaja off. However, there was still a hurdle at the door of the boudoir. Jun Mo asked through the door, Groom, do you know the bride's measurements? Yunshishir's face turned red when she heard the sound of jeering outside the door. At a wedding, the bridesmaids were guarding the door. If the groom was escorting the bride, they would definitely come up with a few harmless questions to make things difficult for him. This question was not harsh and was just to create a lively atmosphere. Mu Yaja smiled and said, I know, but it's not convenient for me to reveal it. Is it not convenient for you to reveal it, or you don't know? Of course, I know. TSK, TSK, TSK. Xiao Shui commented, Sure, your husband is so protective of you. There are so many groomsmen outside. Chairman Mu definitely won't say anything, Mu said. Jun Mo asked another question. Groom, the bride is asking you if you have anything to say to her? She quickly defended herself. Jun Mo, I didn't say that. Shoo. Jun Mo gestured for her, Sure, Mu Yaja's, I love you, Sure, I love you. This was Mu's of his heart. Qin Zhou was to Qin. However, Qin Zhou was not satisfied and said, CEO Mu, that's all you've got. Mu Yaja smiled. I'm not done yet. Held. In the past, I only dared to say, I like you, because the words I love you were too unfamiliar and too heavy. But from today onwards, I will say, I love you to you every day. I've never been good at expressing myself, and I've made you suffer a lot. Along the way, we've been through ups and downs. Because of my personality, I'm not good with words and I don't know how to sweet talk. But, do you know? Every time I see you, my heart says I love you to you, whether you hear it or not. Jun Mo and Xiao Shui looked at each other. They were touched by his confession. Chapter 32-32. Wuxia continued, I, Wuxia, swear. I'll protect you for the rest of my life so that you won't have to wander around and have no one to rely on. No matter how difficult the obstacles are, I'll overcome them for you. Wuxia wavered when she heard this. She said to Junmo, why don't we let the groom in? Don't make things too difficult for him. Okay. Junmo then said, however, we can't let him in so easily. Groom, why don't you sing another song to the bride? Sing. Qin Zhou sized up Wuxia and was a little worried. Mr. Mu, can you sing a cappella? Wuxia deliberated for a moment. Suddenly, he tugged at his tie gently and sang softly. I want to sing to you while I'm young and picturesque, while I'm young and have sex, my dearest person, the journey is long. Let's be together, I'll sing to you, give me your pure and innocent smile, we should be happy and blissful sunny times, I'll sing to you, touch you with my burning feelings, okay, time is worth reminiscing and lingering, shy and blushing face, who can replace you? While I'm young and have sex, my dearest person, the journey is long, let's be together. Yunshushi sat on the bed and listened. His voice was still clear through the door. He sang very well. In the past, she had always wanted him to sing to her, but he seemed to be very stingy and reserved. He was always reluctant to sing. Now, she was going to use this opportunity to feast her ears. The door slowly opened a gap. Junmo blocked the door and cleared her throat. Groom, do you want to come in? Seeing that the door was open, would Lu Jinyu and the rest give it a chance to close it? The group of people worked together to break the door open. However, even though they broke the door open, they still had to consider the 3 bridesmaids in front of the door, lest they get hurt by the door. Yu sighed. Daddy, congratulations on passing. Wuxia was in no mood to pay attention to him. At this moment, all his eyes fell on the bride sitting on the bed. It was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, and the sun shone through the window at an angle. Yunshushi was wearing a red shioha dress as she sat upright on the bed. The gold border of her dress seemed to be plated with holy light. Her exquisite makeup, picturesque eyebrows, and bright red lips, however, did not appear to be rich. Instead, they appeared especially charming and seductive. Wuxia felt his body heating up. However, he knew that it wasn't because of the gong jia forcing him to drink 2 glasses of wine outside the door. It was because the woman in front of him was so beautiful that it was too tempting. Each of her outfits was custom-made by a famous designer. Her long hair was tied into a bun, and there weren't many decorations on it. A golden hairpin was enough to set off her exquisite makeup. Wuxia was looking forward to seeing her in a wedding dress during the lawn wedding. She would definitely be beautiful, dazzlingly beautiful. He slowly walked in front of her, knelt down on one knee, and presented the bouquet in his hand to her. Madam, I'm here. Yunshushi was shy and nervous as she looked at the bouquet in his hand. Her hands were intertwined because of uneasiness. Wuxia gently guided her. Madam, come with me. Yunshushi's gaze landed on him. Today, he was dressed more formally and handsomely than ever before. Chapter 32-33. He was dressed in a tailored suit, which made him look tall and slender. His hairstyle had also been carefully styled, and his handsome facial features had added a bit of heroic spirit to them. Even though they were together every day and hugged each other to sleep every night, today's occasion was too special. Coupled with the man's formal dressing, he looked even more handsome than before. It was to the extent that her heartbeat gradually lost its rhythm. Junmo reminded her cautiously, Sure, have you received the bouquet? The groom has been kneeling for a long time. Wuxia's affectionate look moved even the bridesmaids, and they could not bear to make things difficult for him. Yunshushi then reached out and gently took the bouquet from her. Before she could retract her hand, Wuxia's large palm covered her hand and held it tightly. He leaned forward slightly and hugged her shoulders. Wuxia whispered into her ear, My wife, you're so beautiful today. Yunshushi's face burned again. She was so embarrassed that she did not know what to do in front of everyone. Yu and Xiao Yichen suddenly said, Daddy, you can't take mommy away now, okay? That's right. Daddy, you can't take mommy away yet. The group of people was secretly amused by the two amusing little fellows. Wuxia was a little puzzled. What's wrong? Here. Look at Mommy's feet. Xianxia stretched out her legs, only to see that her feet were bare. She looked up and glared at him with a red face, reminding him, hurry up and find the shoes. Jianghu smacked his forehead and immediately said, Groom, the bridesmaids have hidden the high heels. You have to find them within the time limit, or else you won't be able to take the bride away. She said innocently, we didn't hide them, it was the two little guys. We don't know where they hid them. Wuxia glanced at Yu and Xianxia. The latter pretended to look up and did not look at him. D****. Were these two fellows really his sons? Not even a hint? Wuxia ordered, what are you waiting for? Find my shoes. At his command, Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen immediately started rummaging through the cabinets. Jianghu, on the other hand, was very reserved. He was not like the others who were like wolves and tigers, leisurely opening drawers to look for wedding shoes. However, things were not as simple as they thought. The room was a suite. It was very big, but she still couldn't find it in the wardrobe or under the bed. When everyone returned to the center of the room, they were still confused. The shoes were hidden by the two little fellows. He didn't know what the two little fellows were thinking and where they hid the shoes. All the places with storage functions had been searched, but there was nothing. Wuxia immediately asked, you must have hidden them. Where did you hide them? I won't tell you. The little guy was very arrogant. How could it be so easy to pry open his mouth? Wuxia pursed his lips and immediately walked over. He squatted in front of him and pulled him into his arms. Lowering his voice, he said, Good Yu, can you bear to see Daddy anxious? It wasn't easy for Daddy to pass your uncle's test. Do you have the heart to make things difficult for Daddy? Of course you can. Yu snorted. If it wasn't difficult at all, how could I let you get the beauty so easily? How could there be such a good thing in the world? Chapter 32-34. Yu pushed him away in disdain. His heart softened a little as he snorted and said arrogantly, I can't tell you where it is, but I can give you a hint. Okay. How could this guy be so smart? He even knows how to keep people in suspense. Yu walked to the bed with his hands behind his back. He cleared his throat and said, the hint I'm going to give you is, 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing. 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing? The group of people scratched their heads in confusion. Jiang Shen was baffled. Where's the boat here? Or is it a toy or model of the boat? Maybe these two little ones have hidden it in the toy or model. The groomsmen all gave their suggestions. Wuxia only pondered for a moment before he suddenly thought of something. He walked to the bed and lifted the pillow. Indeed, a red high heel was quietly hidden under the pillow. He held the high-heeled shoes in his hand. Only then did everyone have a flash of inspiration and come to a sudden realization. Jianghu smacked his forehead and clicked his tongue. Why didn't I think of it? Isn't the next sentence of 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing similar to 1,000 years of hard work leads to a shared pillow? It must be hidden under the pillow. At the same time that the group of people was enlightened, they could not help but be impressed by Yu's meticulous thinking. Normally, when a normal person wanted to hide a pair of wedding shoes, they would just randomly find a corner to hide it. Therefore, when they were looking for the shoes, they deliberately chose a corner and neglected the most obvious place. This boy, even when hiding a shoe, he was so knowledgeable and particular about it. This 1,000 years of hard work leads to a shared pillow was very meaningful. She could not help but exclaim, Yu is so smart, I didn't expect it to be hidden here. Jun Mo asked curiously, where's the other one? Yu immediately denied responsibility and said, Xianxia hid the other one, not me. Wuxia turned to look at Xianxia. The latter had a smug look on his face, as if he was waiting for a certain man to approach him. Daddy, do you want to know where the other one is hiding? Little Chen blinked his eyes mysteriously, appearing extremely unfathomable. Wuxia walked over and held his chubby little hand. He said fawningly, "Yichen, you just received so many red packets from Daddy. You can't not help Daddy. Say something nice for me." Xiao Yichen's request wasn't too much, so Wuxia naturally agreed to it. He gently pinched his son's cheeks and coaxed, "Daddy loves Xiao Yichen the most." Yu was a little unhappy when he heard this. He snorted at the side and said, "I'm useless. Daddy loves Xiao Yichen the most, so what about me?" Everyone burst into laughter. Wuxia couldn't coax the two little guys to fight over Mommy's affection. However, in the end, Xiao Yichen made a request and asked Wuxia to carry his mommy and do a few deep squats. Wow! Amazing! Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Fortunately, Xianxia recovered well after giving birth. As she was pregnant, her figure was indeed a little out of shape when she just finished her confinement. However, she persevered and lost weight. However, no matter how thin she was, she still had some weight. Chapter 32-35. For the sake of finding the wedding shoes, Wuxia naturally obeyed. Thus, he carried Xianxia in his arms and did 10 standard push-ups. Even so, this valiant man still managed to complete the push-ups perfectly. Xiao Yichen then ran to the back of the door, took out the high heels that were hidden in the corner of the door, and handed it to him. Hua Jin, who was standing beside him, said, "This is shameless. If the groom didn't find it, it doesn't count." Xiao Yichen put her hands on her hips and said, "Why doesn't it count? I'm the groom's son. If I find it, it'll count as Daddy finding it." Okay. It counts, it counts." Hua Jin held back his laughter and nodded. Wuxia walked to the bed with a pair of wedding shoes and knelt on one knee. The wedding shoes were a beautiful red with high heels and lace as embellishments. He said gently, "My wife, I'm going to put on the shoes for you." Xianxia looked at him, and he looked back at her. His handsome eyes seemed to contain a vast universe, deep and enchanting. She remembered that she had read a fairy tale about Cinderella in the past. The prince had also knelt in front of Cinderella like this and carefully put on her crystal shoes. In the past, when she was pregnant, she could only wear sneakers. When she went out for a walk, her shoelaces would occasionally loosen, and he would patiently crouch down to tie them for her. But now, when he held the high heels and was about to put them on for her, she still blushed because of shyness in front of so many people. Her cheeks, which were originally blushed, now had a charming blush on them. She shyly lifted the hem of her dress and slowly stretched out her bare feet. He reached out his hand and held her small foot with one hand. He gently put the high heels that symbolized happiness and nobility on her foot. "My wife, come with me." Seeing this scene, everyone cheered excitedly. Wuxia immediately sprinkled the petals on the happy newlyweds. Wuxia held her hand and kissed her passionately. At the side, Yu and Xiao Yichen covered their eyes shyly. They felt shy, but they could not help but peek through the gaps between their fingers. Wuxia carried her in his arms. Gong Jia made things difficult for him. He blocked the elevator door and asked him to carry her down the stairs and then carried her to the wedding car. Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Xiao Jia, you don't have to make things difficult for your brother-in-law anymore, right?" Gong Jia raised his head arrogantly. "It's not that easy to marry my sister." Xianxia still wanted to say something, but Wuxia beat her to it. "That's fine too. I want to hold her for a while longer." He bowed his head and hugged her even tighter. He carefully carried her down the stairs. She was a little worried. After all, they had to go up the 3-story stairs and pass through the garden. He had done so many intense exercises earlier, including push-ups and squats. She was worried that his stamina would not be able to take it. Can your stamina take it?" Wuxia bowed his head and looked at her deeply. There was a hint of ambiguity in his eyes. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. I still have to save enough energy for tonight's wedding night." When she heard this, her face turned even redder. Why was this man still saying such indecent things even now? She was angry and amused at the same time. Wuxia saw that her face was very red, but it looked even more charming. He could not help but lower his head and kiss her cheek. Chapter 32-36. The groomsmen behind them could not take it anymore. Their mouths were stuffed with dog food and they could not take it anymore. I say, you two newbies, you should stop before you go too far. Consider us. That's right. Why did I have to be chief's groomsman? I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore, Qin Zhou muttered painfully, I want a wife too. His words resonated with the two single dogs, Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu. A single dog is still a dog. Chief, please be merciful and stop abusing the single dogs. You have to cherish the little animals. Xianxia became even more bashful at their incessant chatter and shyly buried her face in his chest. Wuxia's lips curled into a smile. When he turned around, his expression was stern. You guys should know when to stop. The group of people immediately shut up. He carried her downstairs and walked out of the door, only to find it crowded with people. Yin Yeqing was sitting in a wheelchair with Min Yu pushing it. He was waiting at the door. When he saw Xianxia being carried out by Wuxia, he was so touched that he could not help but shed tears of joy. Min Yu immediately took out a handkerchief and gently wiped his tears. Yin Yeqing sighed. I have no regrets in life now that I've seen Xianxia be happy and see her off on her wedding day. Min Yu nodded and patted him on the shoulder comfortingly. Uncle, today is your daughter's big day. You can't cry. Yin Yeqing hurriedly nodded, holding back his tears of gratitude as he looked on with teary eyes. Zhang Wansan brought his wife over. They came with heartfelt blessings. When they saw Wuxia carrying Xianxia out, they congratulated him. The little boy who bullied you that day was also present. However, this time, he came with gratitude. When he went home that night, he closed his eyes. However, Xianxia's gentle eyes appeared in his mind. Perhaps, Xianxia's act of kindness had completely changed Zhang Wansan's family. Therefore, they were grateful and gave their best wishes to their wedding. When Xianxia saw that so many people were watching, she blushed and said, There are so many people, you should put me down. No need. But, Xianxia looked around shyly. Seeing so many people surrounding them and looking at them, she felt a little embarrassed. Wuxia said, Ignore them. From the entrance of the villa to the main entrance, there was a long red carpet. However, this red carpet was a little special. It was covered with rose petals. From afar, it looked like it led to the Garden of Eden. A gentle breeze blew over, and the thick layer of flower petals on the carpet fluttered in the wind. At a glance, it was as if one was in a sea of flowers, romantic and beautiful. This gave her quite a pleasant surprise. Yesterday, these petals didn't even exist. Wuxia must have sent someone to lay out the red carpet and flower petals this morning. No wonder Xiao Shui could not hide her amazement when she walked in and said that she was especially looking forward to this wedding. She must have looked forward to it after seeing this romantic arrangement. These rose petals in sight were all genuine. It was not cheap to lay them out from home to the main entrance. He had spent a lot of money on this wedding. She was both heartbroken and touched. Chapter 32-37. However, he had said that this was the only wedding he had in his entire life. He had made it grand, not to show off, but to give her an unforgettable memory. He would record the entire wedding. He would keep this recording well. After the vicissitudes of time, when they were old and gray-haired, they would look back on these beautiful images together and feel a lot of emotions. At that time, he would tell her that he would use his entire life to fulfill the promise he had made at the wedding. He carried her and walked to the main entrance. The fleet of cars was quietly waiting for the happiest couple in the world at that moment. The chauffeur opened the car door. He carefully lifted the hem of her dress and helped her into the back seat. She shyly held his hand tightly. Under the envious gazes of everyone, she slowly rolled up the car window. Only then did she relax a little. She leaned her head on his shoulder and clutched at her heart, which was thumping non-stop. Wuxia looked down at her. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm just a little nervous. Later, do we need to welcome the guests? I'll be in charge of welcoming the guests. He knew that she was nervous, so he kissed her little mouth to comfort her and said gently, Madam, don't be nervous. This is a wedding, not an execution ground, okay? Xianxia nodded. The wedding venue was set at Yun Shan's poetic villa. Wuxia had sent people to seal off the huge holiday villa within a 10-mile radius. As the guests were all important people, the security measures had to be strictly enforced. Those who could enter the wedding venue had to have a verified invitation card. Otherwise, no matter how influential they were, they would not be able to enter the wedding venue. The Rolls-Royce stopped at the entrance of the venue. Wuxia held her hand and got out of the car. The styling team, who were waiting at the venue, immediately came up to Xianxia and said, Bride, come with us to change into the wedding gown. Xianxia's eyelashes fluttered. Only then did she remember that one of their wedding ceremonies had a lawn wedding. In a moment of nervousness, she had forgotten. Xianxia turned around and exchanged a look with Wuxia. The latter gestured for her to follow them. Only then did she follow the stylist. The venue welcomed the guests in an orderly manner. The guests entered one after another. Soon, Gong Jia arrived in the car and took care of the wedding matters with Wuxia. Xianxia changed into her wedding gown, readjusted her hair and makeup. She waited quietly with the makeup artist for the wedding ceremony to begin. A few flower girls had also arrived at the venue. Because her wedding dress was a long one, she needed 2 flower girls to hold the hem of the dress for her. When she saw the 2 flower girls, she was surprised. They were 2 blonde Lolita and a little Shota. The little Shota was wearing a suit with suspenders and a bow tie, just like a little gentleman. The little Loli was wearing a fluffy princess dress that was whiter than snow and had a flower crown on her head. She looked like a flower fairy. The little Lolita was the younger sister and the little Xianxia was the older brother. It was said that they were a pair of twins born to Country M's Prime Minister, Roger Alton. He had always been on good terms with Wuxia. When he found out that he was getting married, he volunteered to send a pair of children over to be flower girls. Wuxia, of course, gladly agreed. Chapter 32-38. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen arrived at the dressing room and saw the 2 flower girls. Little Lolita looked like she was about to cry. She looked so pitiful and pitiful. Xianxia immediately pulled little Lolita in front of her and asked in fluent English, What's your name? Little Lolita saw that she was speaking to her in English and instantly felt close to her. She opened her mouth timidly and said in a childish voice, Sunny. Sunny? What a nice name. Little Lolita politely said, Thank you, you. She suddenly turned her head and stared at Xiao Yichen curiously. Yu Yu saw that she was staring timidly at Xiao Yichen and immediately reached out to tug at Xiao Yichen's sleeve. She's looking at you. Xiao Yichen curiously followed his gaze and turned to look at little Lolita. She blushed and hid in Xianxia's arms. Her long eyelashes fluttered and she was as beautiful as a fairy. She seemed to be shy. Beside them, the little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes let out a bell-like laughter. He pointed at Sunny and said, Sunny, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Xianxia looked at the little boy and asked gently, What's your name? My name is Angelo. Xiao Yichen suddenly hooked his arm around Yu Yu's shoulder and asked curiously, Mommy, why don't you let Yu Yu and I be your flower girls? If it's a flower girl, there must be a boy and a girl together, Yu Yu said. It's a pity that little sister is only 6 months old. Xiao Yichen turned around and looked at the 2 little guys worriedly. They looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. He didn't know if they would cause any trouble at such a young age. He had attended a prime minister's wedding with Wuxia before. The bride was also entered by 2 little flower girls. The boy held the ring pillow while the girl held the dress. The ring pillow was an important part of a Western-style wedding. The ring was tied to the pillow and the flower girl would pass it to the bride and groom. Then, the bride and groom would exchange rings. However, after entering the venue, perhaps because she saw so many guests at once, she got stage fright. She accidentally stepped on the hem of her wedding dress and fell to the ground. Before she could cry, the little boy beside her saw her fall and was so frightened that he fell to the ground and hugged the ring pillow in his hands and started to bawl. The crowd's children's, but they didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they saw how uncooperative they were in such an occasion. Even's crying, as the wedding ceremony was to continue. To the wedding ceremony to stop crying, Lolita's. Finally, you, and she, you, oh, to you. You, to you mommy. Calm. You, he. To it, he. Tos. To the yos. Her cries of despair echoed throughout the hall. Chaos ensued. In the end, the adults had no choice but to carry the two little guys off the stage. Only then could the wedding proceed. Xiao Yichen's worry was not unfounded. Chapter 32-39. Just as Xiao Yichen was feeling conflicted, the MC came to the dressing room and said to Yun Shishir, "The ceremony has begun." Yun Shishir immediately became nervous again. The MC brought two flower girls to the venue. When Yu saw that Yun Shishir was still sitting there uneasily, he walked up to her and said, "Mommy, why are you still standing there like a fool? The ceremony is about to begin. You can't let Daddy wait for too long." Yun Shishir clenched her fists and said to him, I'm a little nervous." When Yu heard this, he smiled helplessly. He walked up to her and gave her a gentle hug. Yu is nervous too, but I'm more looking forward to it than nervous. He had already adjusted his state of mind. Previously, he had rejected it, but now, he had accepted it and even looked forward to it. This was because Daddy had transformed into a real man, a man who understood love and had a strong sense of responsibility. If he entrusted Mommy to such a man, he would definitely be able to give Mommy a lifetime of happiness. Yun Shishir slowly stood up. Yu and Xiao Yichen hurriedly went behind her and lifted the hem of her wedding dress. When they arrived at the venue, the MC was interacting with the groom and the guests. The atmosphere was relaxed. Muyaja's back was facing the backstage area. Facing the flower arch, the MC said to the guests, "Now, shall we invite the bride to come out with a round of applause?" Naturally, the guests gave him face and applauded. Muyaja held the bouquet with his back facing Yun Shishir. Just as Yun Shishir was about to walk up to him, Gong Jia suddenly stopped her and said, "Shu." Then, he tiptoed behind Muyaja. The guests were trying hard not to laugh. Even Yun Shishir was amused by Gong Jia. She covered her mouth and snickered. Gong Jia stood behind Muyaja and deliberately lowered his posture. He gently put his arm around his waist, looking like a cute and lovable bird. It was really amusing. The MC said seriously, "Now, the groom, please turn around and face the bride." Muyaja was actually a little nervous. He slowly turned around, only to be met with Gong Jia's close-up handsome face. He was so shocked that he took half a step back with a look of disgust, afraid that he would not be able to avoid him. "Why is it you? Why can't it be me?" Gong Jia burst into laughter and asked in disdain. He was originally looking forward to welcoming the beautiful bride. He could even imagine Yun Shishir standing behind him in a holy wedding dress. However, when he turned around, there was a man standing behind him, and it was his archenemy, Gong Jia. Muyaja was so scared that his heart stopped. Good-natured laughter came from the guests. Muyaja stared coldly at Gong Jia. "Get lost." Gong Jia let out a cold snort and retreated from the stage. The MC immediately said, "It seems that the groom is not sincere enough to welcome the bride. I'll give the groom another chance. Now, the groom, please turn around and wait to welcome the bride." Muyaja turned around and stared meaningfully at the MC. Obviously, he was telling him with his eyes that he didn't like the joke just now. Yu said softly to Yun Shishir, "Mommy, it's your turn to go on stage." Yun Shishir nodded and walked forward slowly. The two flower girls immediately ran over obediently. The little loli held up the hem of her dress while the little Shota held the ring pillow and walked beside her slowly towards the groom. Chapter 32:40. Wuxia heard the commotion behind him. Without waiting for the MC to speak, he turned around. However, even though he was mentally prepared, when he saw Yun Shishir, he was still stunned. He had attended some weddings before. At weddings, when some grooms saw the bride wearing a wedding dress and standing in front of them, they would be so emotional that their eyes would moisten. It had to be said that men did not easily shed tears. However, at such a moment, when the woman he loved appeared in front of him in the most sacred wedding dress, his heart would surge with emotions. Some emotions would come violently, and it would be difficult for him to control them. Wuxia stared at the person in front of him in a daze. As the sunlight shone on her body, her pristine wedding gown seemed to be coated with a layer of sacred radiance. It was so dazzling that he felt a little dizzy. The wedding dress was a strapless design, which happened to reveal her beautiful shoulders and collarbones. She wore a pink diamond necklace around her neck. This necklace was personally put on for her when he first went on a date with her. It had not left her side for so long. Originally, the stylist wanted to give her a sparkling diamond necklace, but she preferred this special necklace, which unexpectedly matched the wedding dress very well. The wedding dress was designed by a famous designer. It was tailor-made, and the waist design completely showed off her exquisite figure. On the chest, there was a white rose made of silk, and it was embellished around the edge of the tube top. It perfectly covered her breasts and made her look noble and elegant. Her ink-black hair was tied up in a beautiful bun. A few strands of curly hair hung over her ears, which made her even more charming and charming. It was different from the makeup she wore during the wedding. At that time, her face was so exquisite that it seemed to glow. Her delicate eyebrows were like the clouds in the distant mountains. Her jet-black eyelashes were long and curly. Without much eyeshadow, her eyebrows and eyes were as beautiful as a painting. Her perky nose bridge did not need any highlight decorations. It was natural. Unlike many brides who wore heavy makeup, she wore makeup but it was very clean. Her face was naturally beautiful, and after careful carving, she was as beautiful as a fairy. Especially that pair of picturesque eyes, they were like obsidian. When she lowered her eyes, the light in her eyes shimmered. Even though she was separated by a thin veil, it added a sense of mysterious beauty. He looked at her and couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He didn't even dare to rashly step forward and disturb this beauty. Yun Shishir faintly smiled as she looked at him. She had imagined her wedding countless times, but the real wedding was even more dreamy than she had imagined. Even though she didn't think much of the wedding before. After all, as far as she knew, he was the only man in her life. Even if there was no need for a wedding to prove it, this fact would not change. But, when she stood in front of him in her wedding dress, it was a different feeling. It was said that a woman had to wear a wedding dress once to be considered a complete woman. As for Wuxia, it was a completely different feeling. He had imagined such a scene countless times, but none of his fantasies were as impactful as witnessing it with his own eyes. His heart was so touched that it was about to overflow. Chapter 32:41. He looked at her with a smile on his lips, but his eyes were also sour. He had experienced countless touching moments, such as when Yueyao was born. He held such a small bundle of milk bun in his arms, and was filled with emotion. However, there was no moment more impactful than this. He lowered his eyes slightly, then raised them again, and walked towards her. His deep eyes hid a burning passion, and he did not hide his deep admiration for her. He walked in front of her, gently hugged her waist, and said in a low voice, "Shishir, are you trying to charm me to death?" When Yun Shishir heard this, she couldn't help but blush. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and when she looked at him again, her face was slightly red. He handed the bouquet to her, and when she took the bouquet, the large palm that was holding her waist pressed down hard. He hugged her, lowered his head, and sealed her lips. Even though the MC had repeatedly emphasized that if he wanted to kiss the bride, it would be best to kiss her forehead, so as to prevent her lipstick from rubbing off and dirtying her makeup, he couldn't control himself. He couldn't care less about so many things, and didn't care that there were so many guests watching. With such a beautiful bride standing in front of him, could he still be expected to care about those rules and regulations? Xianxia was kissed, and at first, she was still a little shy, but she also couldn't control herself, and unconsciously, she held on to his shoulders, and responded to his kiss. She seemed to be unable to hear the clamor of the crowd. At this moment, in her world, only this man, only she, could affect her emotions. Everything, couldn't be controlled. After the kiss, he looked into her bright eyes, and finally smiled. She also cupped his cheeks, and gently used her fingers to wipe away the moisture at the corner of his eyes. The two of them touched their foreheads, and looked at each other affectionately, as if there was no need for those complicated words of love and vows. The deep feelings between them were self-evident. The so-called vows were all done step by step, but some feelings couldn't be expressed by vows. She suddenly felt that those vows and promises were really not that important. Because, from his doting eyes, she saw her own future. Her future life would definitely be happy and complete. No matter if she was rich or poor, he would protect her for the rest of her life. He suddenly hugged her tightly, and the corner of his mouth curled up into an innocent smile like a child's. "You finally belong to me." Under the witness of so many guests, this person at the top of his heart finally belonged to him. Under everyone's witness, he carefully lifted her hand, and slowly put a beautiful pink diamond ring on her finger. The diamond of this diamond ring was not big, and it was probably only 50 carats in size. It wasn't that he couldn't afford an expensive diamond ring, but Xianxia said that if it was a big diamond ring, it would often be inconvenient for her to wear. Previously, the diamond ring during the engagement ceremony was too big. Sometimes, it was inconvenient to take it off because it was too big. In her mind, she didn't need to rely on a ring to show off her status and wealth. She also didn't need to deliberately to show. And she didn't particularly like the big carat diamond ring. The diamond ring didn't need to be too big. To her, the most meaningful thing wasn't the bigger the diamond, but the longer she wore it, the better it was. Chapter 32-42. Xiao Yichen was relieved. At least the two flower girls didn't cause any trouble. Perhaps they had undergone special training, as they didn't have stage fright when they went on stage. All the guests present looked at the newlyweds in amazement. Wuxia was married. This man, who had always been the center of attention and looked down on everyone, actually had such a tender side to him. It was such a luxurious wedding, but it wasn't hard to see how much effort he had put into this wedding. While they were amazed at the extravagance of the wedding, they were also touched by the details of this wedding. No matter how big or small, he had done it personally. After that, Xianxia changed into a Chinese-style Han Tang dress and entered the main hall with Wuxia for the classical ceremony. In comparison, a Chinese-style wedding was more formal. However, even after the touching kisses on the lawn, the guests were still jealous. The men were jealous that Wuxia could marry such a beautiful wife. The women were jealous that Xianxia could marry a man who loved her so much and treated her like the apple of his eye. Her life could be said to be perfect. After the ceremony, when the guests were about to take turns to toast, the door of the hall was suddenly pushed open. The door of the hall was extremely heavy. Hence, no matter how noisy the hall was, when the heavy door was pushed open, everyone was attracted by the sound and looked in the direction of the sound. Wuxia and Xianxia were originally toasting, but when they heard the sound, they turned their heads and looked puzzled. Why would the door be open for no reason? All the guests were present, and no one was left out. There were also guards outside the hall, and no one was allowed to enter. Why? Xianxia looked in the direction of the sound and saw a tall figure standing at the door against the light. Because of the backlight, she couldn't see his face clearly. However, based on his silhouette, she could vaguely tell that he was a very tall man. From the aura he exuded, he must be a middle-aged man. She could vaguely see that he was wearing a trench coat and had an extraordinary aura. However, he was different from the average middle-aged man. He had an extraordinary aura. Even though his appearance could not be seen clearly, his aura could be felt as if they were in the same situation. Gong Jia was standing behind Xianxia. When he saw him, his heart skipped a beat and he muttered unconsciously, "Father." Xianxia turned pale with fright when she heard this. Father, the man whom little Jia addressed so respectfully as his father was none other than. Wuxia was suspicious, but he saw the man standing there for a moment before walking towards Xianxia. It was only when he slowly walked into the venue that his handsome features were exposed under the lights. The man held a pipe in his hand. What entered everyone's eyes was a handsome face. Even though it was stained with the traces of time, it was still difficult to conceal that handsomeness. He must have been an elegant and handsome man when he was young. He was still wearing that British-style suit. His well-built body gave him an extraordinary aura. His eyes and brows were similar to Gong Jie's, and they were incomparably deep. It was hard to imagine that such a man's real age would be. He looked like he was only in his 30s, but after experiencing the vicissitudes of life and the vicissitudes of time, his every movement exuded a charming aura. Chapter 32-43. Yu was also shocked. He could vaguely recognize that this man was the rumored founder of the Hurricane Group, Gong Xiaoying, the head of the Gong family. Previously, Gong Jia had shown him a photo of Gong Xiaoying, and it had left a deep impression on him. Now that he was seeing it with his own eyes, he was extremely shocked. Gong Xiaoying walked slowly into the hall. Perhaps his aura was too oppressive, but the entire hall was silent as he walked in. Everyone was so oppressed by his aura that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Gong Jia was extremely shocked. He didn't know why his father was here, and he didn't know how his father knew that today was his sister's important day. Could it be that his father already knew that he had disappeared for so many days because of his sister's wedding? So he followed the clues and found his way here personally. Yu was even more bewildered. He gently tugged at Gong Jia's hand and asked, "Uncle, why is he here?" Gong Jia looked at him blankly. Yu asked suspiciously, "Were you the one who told him that today is Mommy's wedding?" "No." Gong Jia immediately denied it. "Regarding this matter, I've never mentioned a word to him." Wuxia also saw the man's face clearly. He had never seen Gong Xiaoying before, but just from his facial features and appearance, he knew who he was. Gong Xiaoying. There was no other reason. It was because his features were extremely similar to Gong Jia's and Xianxia's. Especially his eyes, they were similar in form and spirit. Why was he here? However, Gong Xiaoying's appearance didn't cause him much panic. On the other hand, Xianxia was a little flustered. For a moment, she looked at the man who was closing in on her. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. It wasn't until the man walked in front of her and stopped in his tracks that she became even more flustered. Her hands were tightly clasped together as she looked straight at him. For a moment, she actually lost her sense of propriety. Gong Xiaoying was more than a head taller than her. She was 1.7 meters tall, but she only reached his shoulders. His imposing height was comparable to Wuxia. She finally realized who Gong Jia had inherited his high altitude from. He lowered his head to look at her. Although the woman in front of him was already 25 years old and a mother of 3, in his eyes, no matter how he looked at her, she was still a child. When he saw the face up close, Gong Xiaoying tried his best to remain calm, but his mind was still in turmoil. On one hand, it was because this face was too similar to the woman he had been dreaming about for decades. On the other hand, it was because the beautiful woman standing in front of him was his own flesh and blood. She was beautiful, really beautiful. She looked exactly like her mother when she was young. He had always thought that this daughter of his had unfortunately died a few years ago. His heart ached so much that he thought he would never see her again in this lifetime. However, it wasn't until he saw her face up close that he believed the truth. His daughter was still alive. For a moment, Gong Xiaoying was at a loss for words. He just looked at her quietly, wishing that he could use this limited time to make up for the 20 years he had missed. Xianxia didn't know what to do. She was a little embarrassed by his gaze. She put her hands behind her back and averted her gaze. Gong Xiaoying finally spoke, "Raise your head." She looked up and met his deep eyes. Chapter 32-44. Gong Xiaoying looked at her seriously. His gaze fell on her brows and eyes, then moved down to her upturned nose. She looked exactly like Mu Qingqing. Her cherry lips were charming and moving, just like in his memory. She stood on the stage, holding the microphone and singing a decadent love song. She was very flirtatious. So similar, so similar. Her appearance seemed to slowly overlap with the appearance of the woman in his memory. The more he looked at her, the more Gong Xiaoying's hands trembled. He subconsciously raised his head, wanting to touch her, but he was afraid. He was worried that this was just an illusion. Sure. He called her name. That was his daughter's name. The woman standing in front of him was the daughter he had missed for more than 10 years, the daughter that woman had given birth to for him. Gong Xiaoying could not help but feel his heart ache. The memories that had been sealed in his heart seemed to have broken out of their cocoons. Scenes after scenes flashed before his eyes like a merry-go-round. The first time he met Mu Qingqing was at a banquet. At that time, he was a young man in his early 20s. It was the time when he was young and vigorous. He had also been a playboy and had many women. Born in a maritime family, he had traveled extensively and had seen a lot of the world. His heart gradually became wild. The reason why he came to the capital was that as the heir, he had followed his father to the capital to attend a business meeting. At night, there was a banquet and his father asked him to attend on his behalf. At the banquet, he saw her. Mu Qingqing was wearing a gorgeous gown. Although it was in the style of the 90s, it could not hide her unparalleled elegance. Once his eyes met hers, he couldn't take his eyes off her anymore. Gong Xiaoying had been educated in the West since he was young. Hence, he was open-minded, unlike the reserved Asian men. He recognized her and extended an olive branch to her, inviting her to dance with him. At first, Mu Qingqing accepted her invitation only because she was too embarrassed to refuse, so she agreed. At that time, Gong Xiaoying was definitely a playboy. Even though she had seen many men in her career as a singer, she had never seen such a handsome man. So much so that when she was dancing, she repeatedly made mistakes because of her nervousness. However, he didn't mind at all. Instead, he felt that her nervous appearance was actually very cute. Gong Xiaoying was also a powerful figure. After just one dance, he had already figured out her identity and background. Therefore, the story of a romantic love affair was a natural development. What he remembered most was when he asked her to go on a cruise. At that time, it was still the Lantern Festival. He had booked the pleasure boat. She wore a cheongsam to attend. Her graceful figure was charming and moving. He was a normal man. With a beauty in his arms, he couldn't help himself and had her on the boat. She had also retreated because she was reserved. After all, they had only been in love for a few months at that time. Although they had survived in a nightclub environment, her personality was relatively conservative. But what kind of man was Gong Xiaoying? After a round of lovey-dovey, he had conquered her. At night, she wore his jacket and leaned against the side of the boat. She stretched out her slender jade hands and played with the clear ripples of the lake. On the surface of the water, one by one, there were lanterns floating by. She had made a wish that she could accompany the person she loved for life. Chapter 32:45. She was not his only woman. In the past, when he traveled with his father to various countries, he had also befriended some socialites from the upper-class society. However, most of them could not hold on to him and would often be thrown to the back of his mind after the passion. It was not that he was too promiscuous. It was just that some fate did not belong to each other. However, when fate brought them together, success came naturally. At that time, he really believed that this woman would be his lifelong companion. However, later on, when Mu Xing found out about their relationship, he strictly forbade her from seeing him again. Mu Qingqing, on the other hand, had a secret rendezvous with him behind his back. She said, "Brother Xiaoying, I've decided on you in this life. You can't let me down." When he heard this, he was overjoyed. As he kissed her, he promised her, "Qingqing, I'll never let you down. With you in my life, I won't have any regrets." She even thought that he was a poor lad who came out of nowhere. She even swore to be with him for the rest of their lives, where they would have to haggle over every ounce of necessities. If not, how could a relationship be such a complicated and mysterious thing? Sometimes, decades of feelings could not compare to a few months of friendship. Although the two of them had been in love for a few months, it felt as if the world had changed. This was a special feeling. Even if he had other women by his side after that, he had never felt this special feeling before. It was the kind of feeling that, as long as she was by his side, even if the world came to an end, he would have nothing to fear. Hence, when his father asked him to go overseas to take over the maritime affairs in Asia and Europe, he agreed to leave the capital with her and go far away together. Mu Qingqing blushed in embarrassment and agreed. However, when the agreed date came, she did not show up. He thought that this lady probably regretted it and did not have such deep feelings for him that she would abandon everything and leave with him. However, many years later, when she contacted him again by chance, he was indignant. When he repeatedly asked why she did not show up that day, she broke down and cried, "Brother Xiaoying, I can't come." No matter how much I begged and even knelt in front of that man, he still refused. I wanted to leave secretly, but he put me under house arrest. I can't go, I can't go. Mu Qingqing's tears were like raindrops on a pear blossom, causing his heart to clench. Towards the Mu family, she harbored an unforgettable hatred. She said to him, "Brother Xiaoying, I'm pregnant with your sons, a pair of twins. When will you come and take me away? I've been looking forward to meeting you." Only then did he know that not long after he left, she found out that she was pregnant. After being put under house arrest, she originally wanted to protest by going on a hunger strike, but when she thought of the flesh and blood in her stomach, she couldn't bear to do so. After enduring the humiliation for so long, she finally got the chance to escape that kind of hell with the help of the servants. She tossed and turned in bed. In order to avoid being noticed, she took root in a very remote place and gave birth to a pair of twins. She gave birth to them and gave them names. When Gong Xiaoying found out about this, he threatened to make things difficult for the Mu clan. At that time, the Gong clan was no longer the same as before. It was just a small maritime family. After a few years of consolidation, under his operation, the Gong clan grew stronger and stronger. They were now completely on par with the Mu clan. Chapter 32-46. At the same time, Gong Xiaoying wanted to find her, but under such complicated circumstances, it was not easy to bring her back to his side. Mu Qingqing did not have a fixed residence. In order to escape from the Mu family, she changed places many times and led a very down-and-out life. His heart was filled with thoughts of her and the son and daughter she had with him. He followed the address she provided, but often, by a strange combination of factors, she was already gone. He was tied up with Eurasian shipping's affairs and could not go there personally. Unable to be in two places at once, he could only entrust her and his children to a trusted aide in the country. That aide of his had some authority, so with him covering for them, Mu Xing could not find Mu Qingqing's whereabouts in a short time. Until that day. He would never forget that day. They had agreed to meet at a port, and his men would bring her back to him. However, after waiting for a day and a night for 24 hours, he felt as if he had waited for a century. Alas, after waiting for so long, she still did not appear. In the end, he missed her again. This time, he missed her for a lifetime. Instead of waiting for her, he received the news of her death. His men brought back a good-looking boy covered in scars. Due to external injuries, he had temporarily lost a part of his memory. He didn't even remember his own name, his own mother, and even his most beloved sister. Only then did he know that Mu Qingqing had died in a car accident. The other child had also died tragically in a car accident. This child was the only survivor. That moving voice and face that he had been longing for was something that he would never be able to see again in his entire life. The man, who had never shed a tear all this while, burst into tears that night. Regret, hatred, anger, helplessness, and sorrow flooded his heart. His heart was in so much pain that it felt numb. He originally thought that the car accident was a natural disaster, but he did not expect it to be a crime. Mu Qingqing's car had been tampered with, and she was chased relentlessly on the way to the port. He hated it. He hated Mu Xing's heartlessness. He regretted it. He regretted listening to her words back then and not harming the Mu family's foundation. This was how Mu Xing repaid him for his mercy. Because of such a disaster, he and his beloved would be separated forever. The Mu family, this term, had become the two words that he hated the most in his heart. For a very long time, he would always wake up from nightmares. Mu Qingqing's voice and face would appear in his mind, but he could not touch her at all. In order to walk out of the shadow, he had once placed his longing for Mu Qingqing on other women who looked similar to her. But in the middle of the night, only he knew in his heart that the woman he truly wanted would never return to his side. Together with his daughter who had died prematurely, however, now that he saw the woman standing before him with his own eyes, he finally believed that he hadn't lost his daughter. His daughter was still alive. However, when he recovered from his memories, Gong Xiaoying's gaze slowly fell on Wuxia. The hatred in his eyes was self-evident. When Gong Jie saw him, his scalp went numb. He immediately realized that things had gotten a little tricky. One had to know that his father's hatred for the muse was deep-rooted. Hence, he had kept Yun Shishir's matter from him and had never revealed it to him from the start. Chapter 32-47. Good, very good. Gong Xiaoying had a gloomy expression on his face. He swept a deep glance at Gong Jia and said coldly, "Is this the reason why you kept going back and forth to Country Z without telling me?" "Father, shut up." Gong Xiaoying was furious. His shocking aura made everyone in the huge venue stop breathing. Gong Jia lowered his head guiltily and stood at the side without saying a word. He had always been in awe of Gong Xiaoying. This man was his father, as well as the founder of the Hurricane Group. Although he usually treated his son warmly, once he got angry, he would definitely turn into a raging lion. No one dared to go against him. Although he was proud, he would not go against his father's will. Yun Shishir was even more displeased when she saw Gong Xiaoying berating Gong Jia in front of so many people. "Sir, this is my wedding. If you have come with your blessings, then please take a seat and witness my happiness. If you have come with hostility, then please leave this place and walk out of this door. I do not welcome you." She said the last few words with a pause between each word. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. No matter how angry he was, he could only be at a loss in front of her. "Mister?" Look at the way she addressed him. It was so distant. However, it wasn't unreasonable for them to be so distant. After all, for more than 20 years, ever since she was born, the father and daughter had never met. He had never seen her, and she had never seen him. It was inevitable for them to be distant. However, this did not stop him from being close to her. He said, "Shishir, you probably don't know who I am, right?" "I know." Yun Shishir took a deep breath. "Your name is Gong Xiaoying. You are Xiao Jie's father and my mother's lover. Since you know that I am your father, then why?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned. "Do I need to repeat myself?" However, Yun Shishir did not hold back. Perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying's appearance had ruined her wedding, or perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying had reprimanded Xiao Jie in front of her. She was unhappy with him, so her tone was aggressive. "If you're carrying your blessings, I'll arrange a seat for you immediately. If you insist on destroying it, then I will ask you to leave." "Hostility?" Gong Xiaoying laughed helplessly. "You're my daughter, and I'm your father. I can't wait to dote on you, so why would I be hostile to you?" Yun Shishir was shocked. She thought that he was going to give her his blessings, and her expression softened a little. However, she heard Gong Xiaoying say coldly, "But I will never allow you to be with him." After Gong Xiaoying finished speaking, his gaze fell on Wuxia, filled with hostility. She was well aware of who the he was referring to was. Yun Shishir's face turned ashen. At the side, Yu looked at Gong Xiaoying and then at Gong Jia. For a moment, he had mixed feelings. According to seniority, the man in front of him was his grandfather, and also his superior. He was rumored to be the famous CEO of Hurricane Group, Gong Xiaoying. However, why didn't he feel a sense of closeness? Mu Yaja was silent for a moment. It was not because Gong Xiaoying's aura was too intimidating, but he had to take Yun Shishir's wishes into consideration. After all, this was a matter between father and daughter. If they wanted to acknowledge each other, he could not interfere. Chapter 32-48. This man's appearance was within his expectations, yet it was also beyond his expectations. What he had expected was that the Gong family would find out about Yun Shishir's existence sooner or later. When that time came, a dispute would be inevitable. What he had not expected was that he would suddenly appear at their wedding, catching them off guard. Yun Shishir turned to look at Mu Yaja. She suddenly mustered up her courage and reached out her hand, tightly interlocking her fingers with his. She turned to face Gong Xiaoying and smiled. "Since you don't give us your blessings, then, can I ask you to leave this place?" Gong Xiaoying's face turned ugly. "Today is our wedding. I don't want anyone to ruin it. Including you." Yun Shishir paused for a moment, then said, "If you must acknowledge me as your daughter, then please acknowledge him as well. My husband, the man I have chosen for my entire life. If you can't acknowledge him, then I can't acknowledge you either." Gong Xiaoying's heart turned cold. He questioned her, "Do you know who he is?" "He's my husband. There's no doubt about it. He's from the Mu family." Gong Xiaoying interrupted her. "You should know who caused your mother's death." "I know." "Since you already know, Mr. Gong, then forgive me for asking. Back then, you clearly knew where my mother was." Yun Shishir's eyes suddenly reddened. She vented all the resentment and anger in her heart. "Since you knew where my mother was, since you knew about our existence, why didn't you come to find us personally? If you had come personally, such a car accident would have been avoided, right?" Gong Xiaoying was at a loss for words. "So, why didn't you come?" Yun Shishir's voice gradually became hoarse. She asked mournfully, "Do you know how long my mother waited for you and waited for you? Do you know how much she suffered silently for you? Loneliness? Helplessness? Hesitation? Confusion? These were all bestowed upon her by you. When she was young, she used to see her mother sitting by the window, pruning the flowers and looking into the distance. She asked why her mother always sat by the window. His mother was always silent. Until one day, she got up from the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed in disappointment. She was clearly smiling, but she looked like she was about to cry. I'm waiting for him. She was waiting for the man she loved to suddenly appear in her sight one day. She was waiting for the day when she sat by the window and saw him appear outside the door. He waved at her and said gently, "Qingqing, I'm late." Yun Shishir said aggressively, "But why didn't you come? Is it because you have someone else you love, or is it because you are too busy with your so-called career?" She was like a needle piercing him, causing him to feel unbearable pain in his heart. Gong Xiaoying closed his eyes, feeling as if his heart was bleeding. Yun Shishir said, "What does this mean?" "This means that to you, my mother is probably not as important as glory and wealth, right?" Gong Xiaoying froze. Her words only made him feel a stab in his heart. The old scar seemed to have been ruthlessly torn open again, and it was so painful that it bled non-stop. Those bloody memories appeared before his eyes again. The man staggered and couldn't stand steadily. Chapter 32-49. Mu Yaja's heart ached as he pulled her into his embrace, only to hear her continue hatefully. "You don't understand how torturous it is to wait for someone. You also don't understand how hopeless it is to wait for someone who may never appear in your life. Do you know, my mother used her entire life to wait for someone?" Every word was like weeping blood. Gong Xiaoying was in so much pain that he could hardly breathe. He staggered a step, his body on the verge of collapsing. Gong Jia immediately went forward to support Gong Xiaoying's arm. Heartbroken, he said, "Father, sister and brother-in-law are truly in love with each other. I know how difficult it was for them to get to where they are today. Father, I hope that you won't hold on to those old grudges and give brother-in-law and yourself a chance. He used to hate the Mu family to the core, but in the face of his sister's happiness, he gave in. He also hoped that his father would give in. Gong Xiaoying swatted his hand away and questioned, give him a chance? Then, who will give me and your mother a chance? Yun Shishir froze. Gong Xiaoying glared at Mu Yaja and said coldly, the Gongs and Mus are irreconcilable enemies. Irreconcilable enemies, huh? Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. He reached out to pull Yun Shishir into his embrace to declare his stance. Mr. Gong, I hope that you know that the person standing before you is not only your daughter but also my wife, Mu Yaja. Similarly, she is also the woman whom I have decided to spend my life with. The reason why you hate the Mus so much is none other than Mu Xing's interference in their relationship back then. That's why they ended up being separated forever. However, do you want to imitate him and be an executioner who breaks up lovers? Executioner? Gong Xiaoying's eyes widened in shock when he heard that. How could he be an executioner? I don't care where you stand. Since you're here, I might as well tell you where I stand. Mu Yaja looked up and met his gaze. His gaze was cold but firm. I know that the Hurricane Group is famous, and I also know that it's hard to find another family in the world that can compete with the Gong family. I'm even more aware of your strength than mine. But even so, it will not shake my determination to be with Shishir. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. Although the young man in front of him had an incomparably young and handsome face, his arrogant aura was on par with his, not the slightest bit inferior to his. As the saying goes, the younger generation will surpass the older generation. Even though the current Mu Yaja might not be able to enter his eyes with that little bit of strength, Mu Yaja still had a long way to go. However, it was hard to predict what this young man's future would be like. Mu Yaja's face was unperturbed. He held Yun Shishir's hand tightly and said nonchalantly, if you're willing to acknowledge me, then I'll be very grateful. However, if you're unwilling to acknowledge me, then I'm prepared to be enemies with the Hurricane Group. After a pause, he said meaningfully, I only hope that you're prepared to repeat the same mistakes. Repeat the same mistakes? Gong Xiaoying could not understand the meaning behind his words. Mu Yaja curled his lips and said word by word, you don't want your biological daughter to hate you like how you hate the Mus, do you? Mr. Gong. Gong Xiaoying stood rooted to the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. Chapter 3250. You don't want your biological daughter to hate you as much as you hate the Mus, do you? Yu finally could not hold it in any longer. He stood in front of Yun Shishir and told Gong Xiaoying, my daddy and mommy are truly in love. Gong Xianxia, you can't really bear to break up daddy and mommy, right? Mommy has set her sights on daddy, and Xiao Yichen and I have our sights set on daddy, too. I don't want to lose him because of your interference. Gong Xiaoying lowered his eyes and his gaze fell on him. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Suddenly, he recognized this adorable little milk bun. Previously, when his men had gathered information about Yun Shishir, there was information about these two children. Genes were such a miraculous thing. Back then, Mu Qingqing had given birth to a pair of children for him, and her daughter had given birth to a pair of adorable grandchildren for him, too. At that time, when he looked at these two photos, he was filled with emotions. It turned out that he even had grandchildren. These two little lads were really adorable. Their skin was fair and tender, and their eyes were watery. He could vaguely see the shadow of Mu Qingqing in them. These were his two grandchildren. One was Yun Tianyu, and the other was Mu Yichen. Yu looked at him. In front of such a powerful man, he did not show any respect. His expression was calm and composed as he looked up at him. Xiao Yichen looked at him timidly. He knew that this man was his mommy's father and his grandfather. However, he could not feel any closeness at all. Mr. Gong, please think about it carefully. Is hatred so important? Is it so important that even mommy's happiness can be sacrificed? Gong Xiaoying's lips trembled violently. He looked up and glanced at Yun Shishir. The woman standing in front of him was the daughter he had been longing for, but now, she had an unfamiliar expression on her face. In her eyes, there was hostility and probing, but more than that, there was fear. Of course, she wanted to acknowledge him. But, towards him, how could she not hate him? However, what she said was not wrong. If he had been able to find Mu Qingqing personally back then, perhaps there wouldn't have been so many accidents. Furthermore, there was no eternal separation between heaven and man. She was right. However, this didn't mean that the feud between the Gong and Mu families could be written off just like that. For so many years, he had not been able to walk out of this place. It was not something that could be done with just a few words from her. Gong Xiaoying sized up Mu Yaxia, who was standing in front of him. Such a young man, handsome and charismatic. The younger generation will surpass us in time. She could tell that this was an outstanding and extraordinary man, one who was not inferior to her in any way. He knew very well that such a man would definitely be able to protect his daughter and make her happy for the rest of her life. It could also be seen that he had deep feelings for his daughter. However, he could not convince himself to accept such a man as his son-in-law. Gong Xiaoying's thoughts were in a mess. He suddenly felt a headache. His mind was in a mess. He suddenly turned around and took a deep breath. Holding his forehead, he walked away in a lonely manner. His retreating figure looked even more bleak and desolate. Gong Jia chased after him and wanted to support him. However, Gong Xiaoying pushed him away slowly and said in a low voice, "Let me think about it alone." "Father," he wanted to say something. Gong Xiaoying raised his hand to stop him and sighed. "You don't have to say anything." Chapter 32:51. After Gong Xiaoying's departure, there was a brief silence before the wedding proceeded as planned. None of the guests knew what had happened earlier and merely treated it as an unexpected interlude during the wedding. It was impossible for them to know Gong Xiaoying's identity. Naturally, they did not know that the person who had left the venue dejectedly just now was Gong Xiaoying, the founder of Hurricane Group. Although Gong Jia was feeling conflicted, he quickly put those unpleasant matters to the back of his mind. When the ceremony ended, it was time for the toast. Yun Shishir changed into a red gown and walked down the hall with Mu Yaxia to toast everyone. At this segment, Mu Yaxia naturally could not escape from being forced to drink at this rare opportunity. However, why else would he specially choose Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu to be his groomsmen? Not to mention Qin Zhou and Lu Jinyu, Jiang Shen, who had the worst alcohol tolerance among the three, could drink half a liter of white wine with his eyes closed. During the toast, the business partners of Xingyu Financial Group, who usually had business dealings with Mu Yaxia, intended to force him to drink. These were all CEOs with extraordinary backgrounds, and some of them were on good terms with Mu Yaxia in private. Of course, it would be inappropriate for him to refuse. However, at this time, the alcohol tolerance of these three groomsmen came in handy. Mu Linfeng and Mu Yanqing sat among the guests, feeling uneasy as if they were sitting on pins. They had also received the wedding invitation. Mu Yaxia said that, after all, they were a family and were blood-related. Since it was his wedding, he had to send them an invitation. Naturally, whether they came or not was their business and had nothing to do with him. Initially, Mu Linfeng thought that this wedding was probably a trap. However, after thinking about it carefully, Mu Yaxia valued Yun Shishir so much that he would definitely not cause any trouble at the wedding. Hence, they went as promised. However, at the venue, they saw an extremely luxurious wedding. Mu Linfeng was especially upset. The most unpleasant part was none other than the wedding venue. Among the VIPs, some were the country's political leaders, and some were the big bosses of financial groups. Among them, there were a few familiar faces that they had just met. Recently, the Mu Group's capital chain had a gap. Hence, Mu Linfeng was in a terrible fix. Mu Yanqing was even thinking of ways to rope in some investors to alleviate this difficult situation. However, he was rejected several times. When he finally managed to contact the main body, the other party said that they had already established a partnership with other financial groups and did not have the capital to invest in the Mu Group. When Mu Linfeng arrived at the wedding venue and met with these investors, he felt even more awkward. It turned out that these financial groups that had been on good terms with the Mu group had been roped in by the Xingyu financial group. This Mu Yaja was really ruthless. No wonder he was so disdainful when he left the Mu group back then. It turned out that he had already secretly laid out a way out. After the Xingyu financial group went public, there were a series of attacks on the Mu group. However, other than that, he did not leave them any way out and took such drastic measures. Was he trying to shut the Mu group down? Now, what was the purpose of inviting them to the wedding? Did he want them to witness with their own eyes that, even after leaving the Mu group, he could still achieve glory on his own? In contrast to the Xingyu financial group's glory, it made the Mu group look even more down and out. Chapter 3252. Mu Yanqing felt even more indignant inside. On the one hand, he was jealous of Mu Yaja's talent. Even though he had left the Mu group, he did not lose everything. In fact, the glory that he had gained was even greater than before. On the other hand, he looked back at him. He loved Meng Qingxue so much, but his marriage with Meng Qingxue was not something he could take for granted. So what if he became the head of the Mu family? He was still a puppet. No matter how big or small, he had to act according to Mu Linfeng's wishes. By the time Mu Yaja brought Yun Shishir to their table for a toast, all the guests at the table stood up excitedly. Only Mu Linfeng and Mu Yanqing remained seated sullenly. They looked uneasy, a little awkward, and more than that, uncomfortable. They looked at Mu Yaja again and saw a calm smile on his face. Did he expect that a toast would be enough to erase all enmity with a smile? When Mu Yaja saw Mu Linfeng, his lips curled into a smile as he said lightly, "Second uncle, you're here." His attitude wasn't arrogant, but he wasn't very respectful either. His respect for him was limited to calling him second uncle. Only then did Mu Linfeng stand up with a glass of wine in his hand. He glanced at him and then at Yun Shishir. He wanted to force a smile, but in the end, he could only squeeze out a sinister expression. It was not a smile, but it was also not a smile. It was especially awkward. "Congratulations." He said this and then gloomily raised his glass and downed the wine in one gulp. He thought to himself, "This lad is still giving me face. He didn't skip my table." When Mu Yanqing saw Mu Linfeng stand up for a toast, he reluctantly stood up with a glass of wine and said indifferently, "Second brother, I wish you a happy marriage." Similarly, he downed the wine in one gulp. The two of them sat down in silence, not saying a single extra word. In their eyes, Mu Yaja was undoubtedly flaunting his prowess. But in reality, a certain black-bellied man was indeed flaunting his prowess. He invited them to the wedding because he was certain that the two would not fall out due to the occasion. Since they were willing to come, they would also give him face. However, Mu Yaja's motive was not simple. There were many VIPs and business partners present. He also wanted to let them see the strength of the Xingyu financial group. Selfishly, he also hoped that the Mu group would not make any moves against him in the future. "Second uncle, Yanqing, since you're here, I'd like to express my gratitude. Let all the unpleasant things that happened between you and the Mu family fade away with the wind." Mu Yaja poured another glass of wine and toasted him. The corners of Mu Linfeng's lips twitched for a long time before he had no choice but to stand up and force a smile. "Yaja, second uncle, of you. Look at your glorious achievements now, second uncle is happy for you." Mu Yanqing was indignant, but he still stood up. Jianghu walked over and looked at him with disdain. He filled his glass to the brim and said indifferently, "Second young master Mu, today is our chief's big day. Since it's a rare gathering, let's eat and drink well." When Mu Yanqing heard this, he felt as if he had swallowed a fly. Eat and drink well? He was already giving face by not spitting it out. This Jianghu was really asking for a beating. Mu Linfeng deliberated for a long time before he suddenly said, "Yaja, it's just nice. It's rare to see you, so I'd like to discuss something with you." Chapter 3253. He had wanted to talk to Mu Yaja about the Mu family in front of everyone. Now that he had been rebuffed by such a casual remark, he felt extremely embarrassed. After Mu Yaja and Yin Shishir had left, Mu Linfeng was still unable to catch his breath. He sat in his seat with an ashen face. This brat had grown wings now. He even dared to refute his words. However, he did not think about how he had tried so hard to drive Mu Yaja out of the Mu family, leaving no room for negotiation. Now, it was simply wishful thinking for him to get any benefits from Mu Yaja. The people sitting at the same table as him were the directors of several multinational consortiums. When they heard this, they smiled and said, "Second Mu, today is CEO Mu's big day. What business do you have that you have to talk about on the table? Don't tell me it's about the Mu Group's recent shortage of funds." Wuxia Xianxia, the director of Xinhua Financial Group, laughed and said, "I heard from my assistant some time ago that someone from the Mu family came to see me. Second Mu, is it about this matter?" Haha. How could the Mu family have a shortage of funds? Another man, whose background even Mu Linfeng did not know, was actually on the same level as Wuxia Xianxia. He laughed and said, "Mr. Wang, you haven't been in the country for so many years. Don't you know? The Mu family is the wealthiest family in the capital. The consortium manages hundreds of millions of assets. How could there be a shortage of funds?" Mu Linfeng could not express his bitterness. He was holding back his anger but had nowhere to vent it. That's right. The Mu Group used to be rich and powerful. Its capital pool managed hundreds of millions of assets. It used to be glorious. However, these funds were controlled by several directors of the consortium. When Mu Yaja left, these shareholders quickly withdrew their shares and took hundreds of billions of assets with them to the Xingyu Financial Group. Now, the Mu Group only had a reputation. However, only Mu Linfeng knew what it was exactly. It was already considered good if the Mu Group's capital pool could have a few billion in funds now. The company had a pile of bad debts and countless old debts. There were so many assets under his name that were crying piteously for financing, but there was a gap in the capital chain. Every day the project was put on hold, the losses would increase by tens of millions. Now, he was already heavily in debt and could not make ends meet. Now, they could only rely on the medical industry to survive, but they didn't know how long they could last. Many projects became non-performing assets and were forcibly purchased by the state. On the surface, the Mu family was still a glamorous and wealthy family, but no one knew how difficult it was for Mu Linfeng to maintain this reputation. However, he could not admit defeat, nor could he spread the news that Mu Group was no longer what it used to be and was insolvent. If he did that, the few shareholders who were originally guarding Mu Group would definitely leave when they saw that Mu Group was no longer as powerful as it used to be. In previous years, Mu Yaja had been the one to lead the board of directors. The meetings were all about investment and development in various fields. Now, in addition to constantly reporting bad debts, Mu Linfeng was also racking his brains to appease the board members' anxious emotions and construct an ideal investment direction for them. However, no matter how perfect the blueprint was, it was just empty praise. The Mu Group had really lost its momentum. Mu Linfeng had also thought that if not, he might as well thicken his skin and simply invite Mu Yaja back to take charge of the overall situation. However, he could not swallow his pride and did not dare to act rashly. He was afraid that Mu Yaja would be ambitious and take over the Mu Group in one fell swoop. Chapter 3254. Mu Yanqing also had a rough idea of the Mu Group's current situation, but he was not as capable or smart as Mu Yaja. If he had half of Mu Yaja's business talent, perhaps he would be able to lead the Mu Group out of this crisis. Just like back then, when Mu Sheng was unable to recover from the setback caused by the Gong family, Mu Yaja took over the position of CEO and quickly took control of the situation. After a few years of incompetence, the Mu Group regained its glory. However, he was not Mu Yaja and did not have the same brain as him. He did not know how he managed to turn the tide back then. Mu Linfeng was thoroughly disappointed in him. He was too confident back then and thought that the Mu Group could continue to prosper under his control even without Mu Yaja. Alas, he was too conceited and lost everything now. Who else could he count on in the Mu Group? Mu Shumin? Or Mu Yanqing? They were all good-for-nothings. When the wedding was over and Mu Yanqing helped Mu Linfeng out of the venue, Mu Linfeng slowly turned around and looked at the luxurious Xianxia villa. He could not help but feel sorrow in his heart. It seemed that he was wrong back then. Of all things, she should not have schemed against Wuxia. She should not have ruined the Mu Group's great foundation because of a single mistake. If Wuxia had not left the Mu Group back then, it would be logical for him to retire and live out his remaining years in comfort. However, he was too paranoid back then. He was paranoid about having all that vanity, glory, power, and desire. Under such desires, he made such a decision. Sigh. Mu Linfeng let out a regretful sigh as tears welled up in his eyes. He said hoarsely, "Yansheng, if only you had half of that lad's talent, it would be good, good." Mu Yansheng instantly felt uncomfortable when he heard that. Even when he became the head of the Mu family, he still could not escape the fate of being compared to Wuxia. "Second uncle, why are you sighing like that again? You don't understand, you don't understand." Mu Linfeng thought of the predicament the Mu Group was in right now. There were all sorts of matters that had no head or tail, and there was no good way out or retreat. Instantly, he felt exhausted. He waved his hand repeatedly as tears streamed down his face. "I only hope that the Mu Group doesn't fall into my hands." Mu Yansheng was shocked to hear that. "How can that be?" "Second uncle, what do you mean by that? You should know what kind of situation Mu Group is in now. If we can't find a way out, Mu Group will be finished. Even if Mu Group's capital chain is broken, don't we still have the medical industry?" Mu Yansheng comforted him. "The Mu Group's annual revenue from the medical industry is considerable, so you don't have to worry about it. Mu Group is losing money every day. If this continues, the medical industry will collapse. What I'm most afraid of is that if we keep wasting time like this, one day, the Mu Group will finally be unable to do anything. At that time, that brat will take action and forcibly purchase the medical industries under the Mu Group's name. At that time, the Mu Group would be doomed forever. The Mu family, the richest family in the capital, will also become history." Mu Yansheng was frightened when he heard that. He said indignantly, "How can Xingyu Financial Group be so powerful? Can they casually take out tens of billions? Back then, I underestimated him too much." Chapter 32:55. After Wuxia and Xianxia left the wedding venue, the remaining matters were naturally handed over to Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen to take care of. Gong Jia also stayed behind to take care of it. Xianxia initially wanted to stay behind to entertain the guests, but Yu said, "Mommy, leave the rest to us. As for you and Daddy, just enjoy your wedding night." Xianxia couldn't help but blush. Gong Jia knocked him on the head and chided, "Do you know what's going on with the wedding night? Don't just talk about it." "Of course I know." Yu raised his hands and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled meaningfully and said, "Isn't it just that?" "Oh, Uncle." Gong Jia was speechless. She felt helpless and touched at the same time. Since they had said so, she would let go of everything and properly enjoy her newlywed life. At night, she took a shower and walked into the room. The wedding dress she had taken off lay quietly on the bed. She sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the wedding dress, and gently stroked it. Her heart was filled with satisfaction. She was so happy. So happy that it was a little out of this world. This man always surprised her time and time again. This wedding had touched her greatly. Hence, even though the wedding was over, she was still immersed in the bliss of being a newlywed, so much so that she didn't realize that the man's footsteps were quietly approaching her from behind. Wuxia hugged her from behind and gently rested his chin on her shoulder. He asked calmly, "What are you looking at?" Xianxia looked up and met his gentle gaze. For a moment, her heart softened. "Why do I feel like today is like a dream?" "A dream?" "Yeah." Xianxia said a little embarrassedly, "I feel like I'm too happy. I'm so happy that I feel like I'm detached from reality. It's like I'm in a dream." Because of her happiness, her smile became sweet and moving. Her face was flushed red, making people want to kiss her. When Wuxia heard this, he felt that her words were extremely interesting. Why would I give you such an illusion? I never thought that I would have such a dreamy wedding. The next second, Wuxia hugged her waist and pinned her on the bed. His tall body was on top of hers, and his arms were propped on either side of her. His large palms gently caressed her hair as he studied her clean face. He lowered his head and gently kissed her on the lips. At first, it was just a light kiss, but gradually, he was not satisfied with such a light kiss. The tip of his tongue nimbly pried open her lips, and he wanted to go deeper. Xianxia also hugged his shoulders and responded to him shyly and passionately. The two of them continued to kiss until the kiss ended. Her breathing was slightly hurried, but she saw a hint of playfulness in the man's eyes. He asked meaningfully, "Now, do you still think it's a dream?" Wuxia kissed her lips gently again. His large palm reached into her bathrobe and he smiled even more devilishly. "Do you still not feel that it's real?" His large palm clasped her shoulders and pulled her bathrobe down to half her shoulders. His handsome face buried in her neck and neck as he continued to ignite her. Xianxia's body arched up sensitively, and her gaze gradually became beautiful. Wuxia pecked her cheek gently and said seductively, "My dear, there's a saying that a moment of sex is worth 1,000 gold. Have you heard of it?" Her face burned even hotter. Chapter 32:56. Madam, the night is long. Tonight is our wedding night. Let's not let this precious night go to waste, okay? Wuxia suddenly leaned over to her ear and sucked on her earlobe with his thin lips. His warm breath made her shiver. She was about to beg for mercy when the man sucked on her earlobe and said slowly, "You don't know how long I've been waiting for this moment." After a pause, he suddenly smiled and said, "I've been waiting for it even in my dreams." This sentence caused the temperature of her entire body to rise in an instant. Xianxia's face was extremely red. She looked into his eyes shyly, feeling touched and shy. We're already married. It's time to change the way you address me." He reminded her that now that they had held a wedding and he had held a coronation ceremony for her in front of everyone, she was already his legal wife. Xianxia then realized it. She blushed and immediately corrected herself, "Hubby, yeah, I'm here." As Wuxia said this, he was very patient and didn't move. As if she knew what he was waiting for, Xianxia pursed her lips and reached out her hand. Because of her nervousness, her fingertips were trembling slightly. She gently clasped one end of the collar of his bathrobe, and then slowly removed it for him. This was the first time in her life that she had taken the initiative to serve him. She instantly felt that her breathing was faintly hot. Wuxia was very satisfied with her initiative. He kissed her lightly from time to time to give her encouragement. Xianxia suppressed her guilty conscience and removed his bathrobe. She hugged his shoulders and gently kissed his shoulder. The warm breath of her lips brushed against his skin. It was as if there was an electric current that quickly spread to his limbs and bones. It was just a kiss, but it easily ignited him. No matter how determined a man was, he couldn't control himself. He pulled over her car and held her waist. With a twist, he changed their positions and helped her sit up. The sky and earth spun. She suddenly realized that she had changed her position. She was shocked. The man gently encouraged her. "Tonight, you're up there, huh?" Xianxia understood his motive. Her face was like a cloud of fire that was about to burst into flames. In bed, he rarely used this position. In fact, he had been coveting it for a long time. However, because of her reserved nature, he was worried that she would be shy. Every time he wanted to get her on top, he wanted to enjoy her complete seduction. However, in the end, it was all for naught. This time, he decided to be forceful. Using such a posture, he took possession of her without any explanation. In the room, warmth lingered, charming and gentle. He had taken her twice. Initially, she wanted to continue, but she was exhausted and sleepy. She pushed him and said coquettishly, "Didn't you say that you're leaving for your honeymoon tomorrow? You're so tired, what if you can't get up?" "No." Wuxia still wanted it. "Madam, I haven't touched you in a long time. I want you, but what if I can't get out of bed tomorrow? She almost blurted it out. It was only when she saw the playful look in the man's eyes that she suddenly realized what nonsense she had said. She bit her lip shyly and glared at him unhappily. However, the man said, "If you can't get out of bed, I'll carry you onto the plane." You. Stop fooling around. Chapter 32:57. Time to sleep. Since she was unwilling to do so, he did not force her. He restrained himself from thinking about this matter and laid down beside her. However, he was still holding her in his arms. Even though he had stopped, his large palms were still moving up and down her body, unwilling to let go. Xianxia hugged his large palm and said coquettishly, "Stop moving." As if to change the topic, she asked, "Where have you booked this honeymoon trip?" "It's a secret." However, the man pretended to be mysterious. "You'll know tomorrow." "What?" Xianxia's curiosity was overflowing. Her anticipation for the honeymoon trip was no less than her anticipation for the wedding. Now that the wedding was over, she had been racking her brains to guess where the honeymoon trip would be. The Maldives? However, since she had already been there the last time, there was no point in going again. Italy? The Czech Republic? This didn't seem to be this man's usual style. The more he didn't tell her, the more curious she became. As a result, all the sleepiness in her body disappeared in an instant. She hugged his arm and asked coquettishly, "Tell me, where are we going on our honeymoon trip? At least give me something to look forward to." "If I don't tell you, you won't look forward to it?" he asked back. She choked and shook her head. No, little fool." The man smiled. His large palm stroked her hair gently and said, "Be good, don't think too much. Wait until tomorrow, and you will naturally know." "Oh." Xianxia pouted unhappily. Clearly, she couldn't stop her imagination from running wild. She suddenly asked again, "How many days will you be gone? Can you at least tell me? You can stay for as long as you want." Xianxia was puzzled. "What about you?" "Of course I'll be with you." "Something's wrong. You're actually willing to leave Yueyao behind. When the time comes, don't expect your daughter to cry when you're in a foreign country." Wuxia frowned. "I won't." Crying? How could he possibly cry? However, he was a little reluctant to leave Yueyao behind on their honeymoon, but it was a little unrealistic to bring his daughter along. He took the honeymoon trip very seriously. After all, there was rarely any private space between them. From the very beginning, Yu and Xiao Yichen were sandwiched between them. It wasn't that he found them annoying, but there were times when he didn't even have the chance to enjoy their time together. Therefore, he wanted to take advantage of this honeymoon trip to enjoy the world of the two of them. Xianxia buried her face in his chest and asked quietly, "If I go for a month, what about the company?" She raised her head and looked at him. "The company is so busy now. If you don't come back for a month, the board of directors will be in chaos, right? Don't worry about them." Wuxia continued, "I've already taken care of the company's affairs in advance. When I'm not around, Jianghu and Jianghu will take care of it. As for you, be good and come with me on our honeymoon trip. Don't worry so much." Xianxia muttered, "I'm just afraid that the board of directors will talk about me behind your back and confuse you. As a CEO who loves his job, you won't care about the company and only care about me every day. Why aren't you?" Chapter 32:58. You. Xianxia chuckled and glared at him. Suddenly, she smiled coquettishly and hugged his waist, leaning on his chest. "That's great. It's rare to be able to enjoy some alone time with no worries and no need to worry about being disturbed by others. That's great." Wuxia smiled and pinched her nose affectionately. "I promised you that I'll give you the best." She smiled sweetly and rested her head on his arm domineeringly, falling asleep quietly. The next morning, a certain man woke her up in a special way. He coaxed her to get out of bed, washed up, and set off with her. Their luggage was packed early in the morning, and the plane was a private jet. The weather was perfect. When they set off, the sky was clear and boundless. Sitting in the plane, looking out the window, the sky was clear and blue through the snow-white clouds. It was only when the plane landed at the airport and arrived at the destination that she found out where the first stop of her honeymoon trip was. She transferred to a helicopter until a beautiful pink beach came into view. She was shocked and subconsciously blurted out, "Hubble Island? You know about it?" "Of course." Xianxia was thrilled. She hugged his arm and said in surprise, "How did you know that I've always dreamed of coming here for a vacation?" Hubble Island was the most famous resort. On the island, there was a beach that was 3 miles long. The water was clear and the sand was soft. Along the beach, there were 25 colorful villas that formed a luxurious resort. The villas were a combination of Monaco, Balinese, and many other styles. It was also the best diving resort. Pink was the most romantic color for young girls. However, it was often difficult to associate pink with the beach. However, in the Bahamas, like a paradise, there was a beautiful pink beach hidden away. The Bahamas was made up of more than 700 coral islands. Therefore, the surface of the islands was covered with a layer of coral powder and mud. Looking from afar, it was a sea of pink and bright colors, especially at dusk. Against the backdrop of the beach, the sunset scenery was like a dream, like a paradise on earth. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. When they arrived, it was almost dusk. Looking from afar, the beach, the sea, and the sky seemed to gradually change color, from pink to blue, and from blue to pink. The beach reflected the sea, and the sea reflected the sky. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where the end was and where the horizon was. Looking down from the helicopter, one could see the shallow seawater with waves constantly sweeping onto the beach. Even the seawater seemed to be dyed pink. It was especially beautiful and dazzling. Wuxia had the entire island under his control, so he didn't have to worry about being disturbed by anyone. Now, this place belonged to them. "I'm starting to regret it." Xianxia muttered, "Why didn't we think of this when we took our wedding photos? If you want to film it, you can film it now. Even if she doesn't wear a wedding dress, she will still be very beautiful." Xianxia smiled. "Yes. That's good too. It'll be a souvenir." "But, did you bring a photographer?" "Of course I did." Wuxia smiled mysteriously. "Even if it's a honeymoon, we have to make memories." This man was so considerate. He even brought a photographer with him. She was touched by his thoughtfulness. She hugged him and looked at the sea until the land slowly approached. That breathtaking beauty was also getting closer. Chapter 32:59. When they landed on the island, Wuxia held Xianxia's hand as they got off the helicopter. The local crew had been waiting for them at the helipad for a long time. He quickly came up to them, leading a white horse. Wuxia walked up and exchanged a few words with him. Suddenly, he turned around and asked, "Madam, shall we go to the beach to enjoy the sea breeze?" "Now?" "Yeah. There's still some time before dinner. Why don't we go to the beach to enjoy the scenery? Haven't you always wanted to see the pink beach?" Wuxia looked at the sky again. "The scenery is the best now. It won't be too hot." "Sure." Xianxia took another look at the white horse and asked curiously, "Do you want to ride a horse?" "Yeah." Xianxia was a little nervous. She immediately said, "I've never learned how to ride a horse." "Won't I fall?" "I will." He had learned how to ride a horse since he was young. Although he wasn't proficient in it, he was very familiar with riding a horse. The crew walked up and wanted to help her onto the horse, but Wuxia stopped him. How could this petty man bear to see his lovely wife being touched by other people? Even if he had to help her onto the horse, he had to do it himself. Xianxia couldn't do anything about him. She looked at the local crew who was smiling uneasily and returned a smile. When Wuxia saw this, he was slightly displeased. "In the future, you're not allowed to smile at other men." For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Hubby, do you have to do this?" "Of course." He didn't allow her to explain. He walked over and helped her onto the horse. When she was seated properly, he held the saddle and got onto the horse. He sat behind her and hugged her in his arms. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but recall that when she was filming Lethal Beauty, there were also scenes where she had to ride a horse. But most of the actors these days were noble. Even if she volunteered to learn how to ride a horse, it was easy for her to fall down. So, the film crew didn't dare to neglect her. As a result, most of the scenes were shot while the horse was still. What was still fresh in people's minds was a scene in which she rode a horse and rushed to the imperial city at lightning speed. She held the reins in one hand and the whip in the other as she galloped all the way. But in reality, during the filming, the horse was stationary. Her body was moving up and down, pretending to be at the very least. As for the scenery along the way, it was all done with post-production special effects with a green screen around her. She was still a little worried that it would seem a little out of place, but the post-production special effects were quite impressive. The feeling it created was exactly the same as riding a horse in real life. However, even though he had ridden a horse, the horse did not move. When he first sat on it, he felt that the saddle was a little hard. Wuxia held the reins, his slender legs clamped down on the horse's belly, and the white horse began to move slowly. The horse had undergone proper training and Wuxia knew how to command it. Hence, the horse was very obedient under his control. "It's so obedient, so obedient." Xianxia was a little surprised. So this was what riding a horse really looked like. For a moment, she was eager to give it a try. "Is it very difficult to learn how to ride a horse?" "It's not difficult." "Then I want to learn too." Wuxia saw her expectant face and his lips curved into a smile. "I'll teach you tomorrow." "Really?" She had thought that a certain man was worried that she would fall and forbid her from learning. Chapter 3260. Wuxia and Xianxia went abroad for their honeymoon. On the other hand, after Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen were done with the wedding ceremony, Gong Jie suggested to Yu that since Yueyao was being taken care of, he planned to make a trip back to the Gong family. Yu was silent for a long time. Then, he suddenly said, "Uncle, can I go back to the Gong family with you?" "You?" "Yes." Yu smiled and said calmly, "The last time I met Grandpa at the wedding, I was his grandson. This time, I'm going back to the Gong family as a core member of the Hurricane Group." Gong Jia was shocked. "Father didn't realize your identity the last time." "That's because Uncle has protected my identity well." Yu smiled elegantly. "But I'm worried that Grandpa won't be able to let go of his hatred and won't tolerate Daddy. I'm afraid that he'll use underhanded means to deal with Daddy. When that time comes, the situation won't be too awkward." "So, you want to go back personally to persuade him?" Gong Jie smiled. "It's useless. Your grandfather is a very stubborn man. Once he's made a decision, he won't change it." "But he hasn't made any decision yet, has he?" Yu asked. "If he had made a decision, he would have dealt with Daddy long ago." Gong Jie frowned. Yu's identity in the Hurricane Group had always been a mystery. Previously, he had made a name for himself with a blueprint. The core members of the Deva Ika project had accidentally discovered that the blueprint, which was originally used to make toys, was so precise that it could be used in the development of weapons. What was even more shocking was that he had broken into the Hurricane Group's dark web. The dark web, as the name suggested, was a black market on the internet. This world was covered by the internet. On the surface, the online media had a wide range of coverage. In fact, there was also the dark web. From small gun deals to major ones like human trafficking and murdering people, there were all kinds of strange things that could be done. As for the dark web, it was also known as the deep web. As the name implied, it was a deep web that was not accessible to the general public. Usually, the Tieba, Weibo, and major media websites that people visited were all superficial networks. The deep web was a web page that could not be searched by regular search engines. the IP address was well hidden. If the internet world was described as an iceberg, then the web pages that people usually touched were only the tip of the iceberg. The remaining 90% were hidden in the deep sea. Most people would never be able to touch them in their lifetime. The number of domain names on the dark web was more than 1,000 times more than the surface web. The first level was the shallowest and could be accessed through a specific browser. The content was some pornography and other unknown content. The second level was not so easy to enter. It could only be entered through a specific invitation method. There were all kinds of evil forces and terrorist organizations. Very few people had ever explored the third floor. It was said that it hid some classified documents that could not be exposed to the light of day. Yu found out about the existence of the dark web in this world by chance. He entered a string of domain names. Coincidentally, the domain name was a human trafficking dark web. On the web, there were pictures of different races and the price of different organs. Chapter 3261. Yu had never thought that there was such a dark side to the world. It was filled with so many heinous transactions. Hence, he used his technology to hack into other dark websites. Only then did he realize that such dark websites were numerous. One of the dark websites was a social network that specialized in selling women. On the web page, there were many pictures of women being tied up and raped. He even found out that there was an underground club in another dark website. This club kidnapped the victims and allowed the rich and powerful to pay for their entertainment. In a certain market, such transactions were legal. However, such an illegal website had never been shown to the world. Some of the victims were willing. Because their families were poor, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to save their families from starvation. Some of the victims were kidnapped and taken away. Their photos were published on the web and the employer would quote a price. The highest bidder would get it. The organization would then send people to kidnap the victims for their entertainment. When Yu saw such a dark side of the world, he was terrified. At the same time, he thought, I can't let my mommy be in such danger. Everyone had a sense of danger. Yu's sense of danger was especially strong. He swore that he would make himself stronger. That was until he accidentally hacked into the Hurricane Group's dark website. He intercepted a confidential document sent by a few high-ranking members of the Hurricane Group. When he opened the document, he saw a blueprint. This blueprint was the design of the parts used by the Hurricane Group to develop the Heaven's Eye project. There were thousands of such parts on the web. The Hurricane Group wanted to set up a heaven's net around the world. However, such a heaven's net was only the tip of the iceberg. Yu was interested in this blueprint. In his opinion, if this blueprint was redesigned, it might be able to be used to make toys. Hence, what happened next happened. The first to discover that the dark website of the Hurricane Group had been hacked was Gong Jie. He suspected that it was the work of a top hacker. The confidential blueprint was also stolen and disappeared. However, a few days later, the redesigned blueprint was uploaded to the dark web. Gong Jie realized that the blueprint was so precise that it made his hair stand on end. The altered data came from an IP address. Following this IP address, Hurricane also hacked into Yu's computer. However, he didn't find any useful information. When Yu found out that her network had been hacked by Hurricane, she started fighting with a few of Hurricane's top hackers. When Gong Jie took this drawing to the headquarters of Sky Eye, several designers were shocked and thought that the person who designed this drawing was definitely a genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. Therefore, the Hurricane Group extended an olive branch to him, but they did not expect that such a blueprint would come from a 6-year-old child. When Gong Xiaoying found out about this, he still thought it was a fantasy. As the world's #1 firearms group, the Hurricane Group had seen all kinds of situations, but they had never seen such a young but powerful child. Such a blueprint was too precise. Even with Leji's advanced manufacturing technology, it was impossible to create such a toy. When Yu first joined the Hurricane Group, she was not a core member. Chapter 3262. Secondly, Hurricane had its reservations as well. After all, he was only a 6-year-old child. If he were to be officially included as a core developer, it would surely attract unnecessary trouble. Later, when Yu officially joined the Hurricane Group, Yu did not agree to meet him and rejected him outright. Gong Xiaoying clicked his tongue in wonder. In the entire Hurricane Group, whenever he wanted to see someone, which one of them wouldn't be in awe? However, this young man was the only one who was proud and arrogant, allowing himself to do as he pleased. Gong Xiaoying found it interesting, too. This time, Yu wanted to take the initiative to meet Gong Xiaoying, but he had a selfish motive. Mommy and Daddy are very happy together. Yu told Gong Jia, even though I'm protecting Mommy wholeheartedly, I've seen how they've been through ups and downs along the way. That's why I approve of him. I approve that this man has the right to be Mommy's husband. Mommy loves him, too. I don't want Grandpa to make the same mistake and repeat the tragedy of the past. After a pause, Yu continued, that's why I want to meet him and talk to him about this matter. What kind of card is this? A family card? Gong Jia asked half-jokingly. I guess so. Alright, I'll bring you back. Gong Jia suddenly added, but you have to be mentally prepared. The Gong family isn't a place where you can enter and leave as you wish. Yu laughed arrogantly and said nonchalantly, the one who has to be mentally prepared is him, right? These words were undoubtedly Yu's unique style. Arrogant and overbearing. He actually resembled the high-spirited Gong Jia when he was young. Gong Jia said, I've already sent someone to send Yun Yecheng back to the Gong family. We'll take the cargo ship back. All right. Once everything was ready, Yun Tianyu instructed Mu Yichen to stay at home to take care of Yueyao. Even if Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir were not around, with Hua Jin and the nanny, Yueyao would definitely be well taken care of. Gong Jia would also send people to protect them in secret, so there was no need to worry about Mu Yichen and Yueyao's safety. The next day, Yu left with Gong Jia. This was Yu's first time sitting on a cargo ship. It was such a huge ship, carrying hundreds of tons of goods. The ship was as tall as a mountain. Just by standing at the port and looking at it from afar, Yu was already in awe. When they boarded the port, Gong Jia showed Yu around the cargo ship. Yu felt a chill down his spine when he saw the weapons and ammunition on the ship. With so much ammunition, an entire island could be blown up and sunk. Gong Jia asked, do you want to take a look at the warehouse? No need. Yu was not interested in those cold weapons. Gong Jia glanced at him and smiled. Yu, do you remember the first thing you did when you joined Hurricane Group? Huh. You proposed a price and sold that blueprint to Hurricane Group for 100 million. After that, you used that money to invest in a toy company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Everyone said that you were crazy. Only a lunatic would spend 100 million to buy a blueprint from a child. Gong Jia smiled. He was the one who paid that 100 million. 100 million was just a small sum to him. He just wanted to see what a child would do with 100 million. Buy countless lollipops? Or piles of toys and snacks? It was hard to imagine that he would invest in a toy company. Chapter 3263. Back then, when you invested in Liji, you used Li Hanlon's name. In other words, this 100 million is equivalent to being under Li Hanlon's name. Aren't you worried that Li Hanlon will burn the bridge after using you and turn against you after Liji comes back from the dead? After all, this is not a small sum of money. Li Hanlon is a very capable person. However, I like him for two reasons. Firstly, it's because of his loyalty. Secondly, it's because I believe that if he turns his back on me, Liji will be a pile of ruins in his hands. Gong Jia seemed to be picking on him. Firstly, how can you be so sure that he's loyal to you and has no other intentions? Secondly, how can you be so sure that without you, Liji will be a pile of ruins? Yu replied patiently, firstly, I've interacted with him a few times and I believe in my own judgment of people. In fact, I'm not wrong about him. Secondly, Liji was originally a pile of ruins with a lack of cash flow. Maybe with this 100 million renminbi, it can recover, but it can't solve the root of the problem. Liji's business philosophy is problematic and their product development is not enough. To Leji, I'm much more important than that 100 million renminbi. Gong Jia was stunned for a long time. It was hard to imagine that a 6-year-old kid could have such courage. He suddenly squatted down in front of him and pulled his face. Yu Yu felt pain from the pull and took a step back. He looked at him warily and said unhappily, "What are you doing?" "It hurts. I want to see what kind of person is hiding under your skin, huh?" Yu Yu was puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Yu Yu, to be honest, don't tell me you're a mutated species. Or, in the movies I've seen, people come back from the dead and travel back in time. Don't tell me you're from the future." Yu Yu said coldly, "You're crazy." Gong Jia said, "Otherwise, it'll be hard to convince me that you're a 6-year-old kid." "Yu Yu, monster?" Yu Yu's eyes twitched. "If I'm a little monster, then you're a big monster." Gong Jia laughed. "When I was 6 years old, I was still playing with mud. You still don't know what a computer is." At that time, computers had not been popularized and the internet had not been developed. "This is the first time in my life that I've seen someone say it out loud even though they know they're stupid." Gong Jia choked. Yu Yu rubbed her rosy cheeks and said unhappily, "I'm also troubled by her high IQ." "How is having a high IQ a problem?" Yu Yu glanced at him coldly from the corner of his eyes. "Sometimes, it takes a lot of effort to communicate with idiots like you." Gong Jia's face turned cold. "Isn't it annoying to be with a bunch of idiots?" Gong Jia felt even more depressed. "Are you looking down on Uncle?" Yu Yu gave him a nonchalant look and snorted coldly. However, she did not say anything. The feeling of being looked down on by a little kid was really not good at all. No. It hurt. Quick. Gong Jia was very hurt. Yu Yu was not just looking down on him. It was very tiring to be with that idiot Xiao Yichen every day. Yu Yu said, Geniuses are always lonely. I didn't expect that someone as handsome as me would say such sad words." Gong Jia said, "You're heartless. If it weren't for my 100 million, Luji wouldn't be where he is today. Even if you didn't give me that 100 million, someone else would." Gong Jia's expression turned even uglier. Chapter 3264. Gong Jia was about to go berserk. Since when did he keep talking about it? Gong Jia could not be bothered to argue with him. When it came to sharp tongues, Yu Yu was definitely number one. He did not know how this guy's brain worked. Sometimes, a sentence that came out of his mouth could simply infuriate people to death. Gong Jia also admitted defeat. "Let's not talk about this anymore." Gong Jia laughed. "Do you need me to take you on a tour of the cargo ship?" Yu Yu nodded happily. The cargo ship was very big. How big was it? It had a cargo capacity of 15,000 TEU. There were a few hundred warehouses in total. Among them, there were more than 10 warehouses with large reserves that were specially used to carry large parts and goods. For example, the parts of fighter jets, or some important heavy industry parts. Hurricane Group was involved in a wide range of products, from guns and ammunition to fighter jets. Their manufacturing technology was the best in the world. However, due to the special nature of fighter jets, they were usually used for cargo ships compared to planes and trains. Fighter jets were very big. When they were transported, they would often dismantle the plane into parts and transport them together. Just one wing of the plane would take up a large warehouse. Therefore, this cargo ship's large warehouse was used to transport fighter jet parts. Usually, it could transport 10 fighter jets. Yu Yu looked down one after another and was quite surprised. When the warehouse door opened, he stood at the 8-meter-tall warehouse door and realized that this cargo ship was really big. Just the door alone was 8 meters high. It was too shocking. So the J-1-2 fighter jet is this big? What else could it be? Gong Jia leaned against the door with a deep smile. Some of the parts of this fighter jet were designed by you. He walked in front of him and said in a deep voice, "This fighter jet is worth $300 million US. Actual combat has proven that the J-1-2 is more suitable for the North African battlefield than the American Eagle. According to my calculations, the cost of this fighter jet is only about 10 million. Compared to the selling price of the Hurricane, it is definitely cheap. Military munitions are really profitable. The 300 million isn't for a fighter jet. It's for the North African battlefield. It's for the government's biggest bargaining chip to keep the armed forces in check. 300 million may be expensive, but they're very nimble with it. Moreover, they even reluctantly gave up the mining rights to the Hurricanes. How despicable. Gong Jie disagreed. Despicable? How am I despicable? You think I don't know? North Africa is in political turmoil. The reason why the anti-Jianghu armed groups have the ability to contend against the Jianghu is because Hurricane sold them a batch of high-power munitions. A rocket directly blew up the parliament building. Otherwise, the government wouldn't be so anxious to buy this fighter jet. In that case, it seemed a little complicated. But it was actually very simple. The war in North Africa started when the Gong Jie sold a batch of firearms to the anti-Jianghu army. When the war started, the government was caught off guard, and the parliament building was directly bombed into ruins. Therefore, in order to keep the situation in check, the government had no choice but to import a large number of weapons from the Hurricane Group. The Hurricane Group was the world's largest profiteer group. All businessmen were profiteers. This saying wasn't without reason. Gong Xiaoying was a businessman. Naturally, he wouldn't do a business that was at a loss. Although the Hurricane Group didn't start the war, it escalated the war. Chapter 3265. In other words, the reason why the Hurricane Group was feared was because the Hurricane Group had the biggest say in the war. Gong Jie looked at Yu Yu with deep eyes and smiled. Yu Yu, I'm more and more impressed with you. Same to you. Gong Jie suddenly changed the topic. However, when it comes to ambition, you're more ruthless than me. So far, your air control theory is the craziest plan I've ever seen. The original intention of my Sky Eye plan is to maintain world peace. Oh. How do you know that once the Sky Eye plan is developed, world peace will really be achieved? Gong Jie paused for a moment before continuing. In this world, there's no limit to one's ambition. The history of war is as long as the history of mankind. The ambition of man is endless. In ancient times, wars were for power. Now, it's for resources. The reason why Africa and the Middle East are in constant war is because of rich mineral resources, oil, and natural gas. The ambition of man is indeed endless. Even if the earth is destroyed, the sky will still be there. Yu Yu crossed his arms and smiled. The rivers will dry up and the land will dry up, but there will never be a day when the vast sky will be destroyed. Once you have control of the sky, you will truly control the world. Whoever gets control of the air control theory, first will have the ability to dominate the world. When that time comes, world peace will no longer be a matter of who has the final say. Gong Jie looked at him. The child in front of him was adorable. His pink cheeks were like the finest jade. It was hard to imagine that such words came from the mouth of such a child. Fortunately, such a child was his nephew. Otherwise, it was hard to imagine how terrifying it would be if such a person became an enemy. The journey on the sea was longer than the flight. The cargo ship needed to stop at Vitoman port to deliver a batch of orders and then rush to the Hurricane Group headquarters. However, it was Yu Yu's first time on a cargo ship. Therefore, he was very curious about everything on the ship. Gong Jie would also tell him about some interesting things that happened on the sea when he was escorting the firearms. Once, when we passed by the Somali Straits, we met a bunch of reckless bandits who chased after us. They hijacked our cargo ship and forcibly boarded it. Yu Yu was stunned when she heard this. These islands are really bold. How dare they kidnap the Hurricane Group? The ship didn't fly a flag that day. Generally speaking, cargo ships would hang the logo of the Hurricane Group. No matter how arrogant an island was, they wouldn't dare to act recklessly. Unfortunately, on that day, the flag was blown away by the sea breeze. When the pirates saw such a large cargo ship, they had evil intentions. The Somali pirates were the most notorious in the sea. This was a group of criminals who specialized in robbing other countries' ships at sea. With the outbreak of the civil war in Somalia, pirate activities in the Gulf of Aden had become more frequent. There had been many cases of hijacking and even violent killings of sailors. Among them, the most notorious teams were the Puntland Guards and Merca. Yu also knew a little about the evil deeds in Somalia. Somalia was one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world. Its industrial base was weak, and its economy was weak. Coupled with the effects of war, its economy had declined even more. Chapter 3266. Some time ago, there was news that a cargo ship passing through the Gulf of Aden was hijacked by Somali pirates. The cargo on the ship was robbed, the crew was shot dead, and the captain was kidnapped. The government came forward to negotiate, but the negotiation failed because of the reward. The captain was killed. This incident became the biggest crisis in the history of the country. The citizens complained about the government's incompetence in the negotiation. What happened after that? They regretted it after they boarded the ship. Yu cursed in his heart. They must have died miserably. Those pitiful islanders boarded the cargo ship aggressively, only to be greeted by a few cannons facing them. Under Gong Jie's orders, they were blasted into ashes. The remaining islanders wanted to escape, but their small ships were sunk by Gong Jie's armed cargo ship. Sunk, just imagining the scene was enough to make one's heart tremble. They're really ruthless. Gong Jie said innocently, they wanted to die, so I couldn't do anything about it. The next day, the cargo ship arrived at Vidoman port. The transaction time was 11:00 at night, and the location was at Minghai port. There was still half an hour before the appointed time. Gong Jie wanted Yu to stay, but Yu said that he wanted to go with him to see the world. Gong Jie did not object. The person who traded with Hurricane was a Russian arms dealer. His name was Damon, a middle-aged man in his 50s. He used to be in the Soviet Air Force and used to serve in the peacekeeping force. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he started his business by privately selling armors. His background was not big, but it was not small either. He mainly focused on the East Asian arms market and had a large sales network in the East Asian arms industry. He could be considered a small tycoon. He had dealings with Hurricane for many years. He was also a regular customer of Hurricane in the past few decades. Their friendship was considered deep. Yu had heard about this man from Gong Jie on the boat. He was a cunning man with a greedy nature, which was a characteristic of businessmen. Other than that, he was not dangerous. In his eyes, military merchants were no different from ordinary merchants. They both did business and made money by selling goods. There was no difference. It was just that the goods sold by military merchants were more dangerous. Yu asked, "Uncle, what's the deal this time?" Gong Jie replied, "The goods included 300 grenades, 5,000 rifles, 10,000 pistols, and 100,000 rifle bullets. The transaction fee was 8 million renminbi." As he spoke, he took out a few documents and contracts from his briefcase. "Everything has been settled with Demon. We'll hand over the money and receive the goods." Yu nodded and didn't say anything else. He wanted to end the deal early so that he could go back to sleep. He was sleepy now. A line of black cars and 2 large trucks slowly drove into the port. When Demon arrived at the port with a group of men, he could see the extremely eye-catching huge cargo ship from afar through the window. He could see the group of people standing in front of the port at a glance. Late at night, it was cold. Now the port was shrouded in moonlight and looked particularly bleak.